Welcome back to the Coach Robb Podcast Network, Navigating Amateur Motocross, episode number 7. Derek, can you believe we're here already? The James Stewart episode. Here we are.
Can't believe it. And for the young guys watching this, we're on the Aaron Plessinger episode. The Cowboy.
That's true. That's true.
I was watching the Nationals a little bit. It's the first weekend I have not followed it. I don't know about you. I pretty much have followed racing religiously my whole life.
Sure.
And this weekend I missed it. I just had a bunch of stuff going on, but I catch highlights and whatever. And I saw an interview with Plessinger on the podium. It was like one of the few little bits that I caught. And he literally, I think this is why the fan loved him. I don't know if it's an act or if it's true, but the Cowboy said, man, the response from this crowd is just unbelievable. Like everywhere I go, I just cannot believe it. It's amazing. Thank you guys. And I think that if there's a lesson for parents before we even get into our podcast today, about what actually makes money and sells in this sport outside of winning races, because winning races is what really will make you money. It's that you have to be somebody that the fans can resonate with. You can't just be mundane. Yeah. So I think AP has figured that out. And for episode 7, what a better way to tick it off than to kind of get some wisdom from AP, the good old Cowboy.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about it. For those of you who have been following us for the first 6 episodes, thank you so much. If you're new to the show, welcome today. We're going to be looking at tips and tricks to navigating the national championships at Loretta Lynn's. And I do agree with you, Derek, 100%. Obviously, as we tease with every show, this conversation is never scripted. I was actually just talking with Johnny Hopper about this earlier today. When you look at the idea that obviously the current guy that everybody's looking to is Deegan. And I think Deegan is doing a great job of illustrating when you're having fun. Yeah, he's competitive. He's a mini Tomac beast mode. But I think Deegan's actually enjoying it. And I know there's going to be people that say, yeah, but what about the privateer that's got to work Monday through Friday, drive all night, race on Saturday, drive all night, go back to work on Monday? I understand it's difficult. But I do agree with you. Plessinger's having fun. And I think that, and I have a little bit of a problem with that because sometimes it's like, oh, I'm not having fun. What's your job, dude? You're getting paid to race a dirt bike.
It can't always be fun.
Yeah.
Right.
Traveling,
but it should be a mentality problem too. It's like, if you're not having fun, quit.
It's funny you say that. Somebody in the chat room had mentioned how J. Coop always looks miserable.
Yeah.
And they were comparing that to Plessinger, how Plessinger or Deegan in this, look like he's having fun. And yet J. Coop's being relatively successful this year, but he still doesn't look like he enjoys it. It reminds me, I'm going to show my age. It's kind of like Pastrana versus a Luraco.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Travis is always smiling and still has the same sponsors that he had from back then, maybe San Suzuki, where Luraco just went out, did his job, didn't care about being personable. And that's not a dig on him. That's his personality, and that's perfectly fine. But from a marketability standpoint, it's definitely hard, and it caught your attention. You're kind of behind, and what caught, not
of all the things I saw, that's what I remember from the weekend.
It was his personality. Yeah,
yep, 100%. That's what sells. And unfortunately, if you're a young athlete or a parent watching this, you play the character that you need to play in that particular scenario,
and also keep it in perspective, especially these parents that are on any bike below a 250.
Yeah,
right. I mean, you could. How many people do you know? And you've got a lot of riders that you've worked with, Derek, who won 50 class, 65, 85, 125 class, as the Europeans call it, and then fizzled out. I think it's amazing. If you guys get a chance on Racer X, they're doing like the riders who have done well at Loretta's. And I think it's so cool because I remember those names like Corey Keening and stuff. Right. And where do they go? And they've got 4 championships.
The whole purpose is this podcast is a combination of things, but one being like, here are his tips and tricks. Like, so today's, hey, you're headed to Loretta's in a couple weeks.
Yep.
So if you're headed there now, watch this podcast, or if you want to head there in the future, or there's another big event in your life that's going to be a week-long event.
Exactly.
All of this is relevant, and it would be relevant to mountain bikes. It would be relevant to any form of a 1-week-long event in your life. But why don't we hit it with a little bit of, I think the hardest part of Loretta's, and we'll touch on 2 sides today, motorcycle and then the athlete. Yep. And of course there's the family and all that stuff. We'll work into it. But why don't we start a little bit on the athlete? This is the side that you are obviously the expert in, and we've touched on it on our early episodes. But what would you say are the 3 or 4 or 5 things? Like, what are the bullet points to being successful physiologically for Loretta's?
I know it's going to catch people off guard, but if I said to you, I want you to go into your garage and pull a bike out that's got 75 to 100 hours on it, and I promise I'll get Rob Fox from Dunlop to throw some special, some new sneakers on it, would you be very confident in a bike that's got 75 to 100 hours on it? And there's not one person that's old enough to realize, yeah, that would not be a good choice. Let's go ahead and add a mud day where we cover the radiators with mud, cover the motor with mud, throw a little bit more stress on it. Nobody would be surprised if it mechanically grenades itself. But yet I'm getting phone calls from parents, even as we speak this week, that they're at compounds and they're grinding 20-minute motos. They're doing 3, 4, 6 motos. I looked at one rider's hour meter. We use a chest strap. You guys think about it as your motorcycle. They put 14 hours on this rider. This would have been 2 weeks ago now. So let's call it the first, let's say it's 4 weeks out from Loretta's. And this particular facility put 14 hours on an 85 rider. Now you got to stop and think about that. See, where we get into this physiological debacle is it takes 6 months to build an aerobic engine and a base of strength. So if you think physiologically you can build an aerobic engine in 4 weeks, you're painfully mistaken. And
I could barely build a race engine in 4 weeks. So
that's a great point.
I don't know how I could do a whole body,
Well, and that's where the facility, and I'm not throwing facilities under the bus. I'm talking more about a mindset. So maybe let's extrapolate the word facilities and just talk about riding coaches, trainers, whatever title you want to give people.
I'll say guilty, right? So when you're young, I'm getting prepared for this event and I don't know any better.
Yeah.
Well, I got 20s coming up and I got to ride a lot and I got to ride 20s to be prepared for 20s.
Yeah.
Well, you start grinding that out the month before you go to Loretta's because, I made it out of my regional. I didn't know if I was going to go or I wasn't going to go.
Yes.
All of a sudden now I'm going to up my workload right before Loretta's. I've been there. We've all done that. So basically, if you're watching this, so what's the right approach from your perspective?
Literally, the key word is perspective. Change your perspective. So, for example, when you get into the physiology world, it's something we refer to as periodization. Everybody's known that Loretta's is going to be the first week in August since last year at Loretta's, right? The date never changes. So to act surprised that you've got to be ready for 3 20-minute motos per class over 5 days, if that's an aha moment for you, then you've been living underneath a rock. So that's why I always say with my clients, we start training for Loretta's no later than January. You go, yeah, but Rob, that's 8 months versus 6 months. Yeah, but you've got Daytona, Freestone,
right?
You've got areas, you've got Mammoth, you've got other races in between there. But hey, depending on when you're watching this, let's just say that you're 2 weeks out from the event when you watch this. You've got to change your perspective. I always use the Garmin because it's the easiest way to illustrate it, is just go onto your Garmin dashboard, go to your activities that you log all of your seat time, and just go through the time column and just eyeball and surmise it. In the last 6 months, how many hours have you put on your motorcycle? Not minutes, hours. So I just did this with one of our clients this past week. And in the month of June, I'm just going to use a loose number for illustration's sake. He put on 20 hours on the motorcycle, 5 hours a week. All right. So now you're looking at 20 hours. Are you really concerned about doing a 20-minute moto at Loretta's? Now we're going to talk about heat, humidity, and other things that can negatively impact performance. But if you're talking about sheer fitness, are you really concerned about doing a 20-minute moto, especially when you only have to do one race per day? Now, Derek, you mentioned it earlier, like you're guilty of this. That's what we refer to as working in a mode of fear instead of being proactive. If you're training with periodization and you're training with purpose, if I've got an athlete such as yourself that's been to Loretta's, well, you can tell me what made that race difficult. Maybe it was the heat and humidity. Maybe it was 10 commandments. Maybe it was the sand section. Maybe it was the intensity. Maybe it was the fear of the first turn, whatever it may be. Well, you should take it apart and address those frustrations because you know what to expect. For those that are going there the first time, the only thing I can say, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Derek, just go enjoy yourself.
Well, so actually, it's funny you brought that up. So for bullet points for me, actually, to knock this out really quickly, and the goal for this podcast, I think, is we're going to break this down podcast by podcast for next season. Yeah. So essentially, we're working some guests, give you guys some, like we've already done. We have an amazing guest previously in a previous episode that the two that we've had have been fantastic.
Yep.
One of the things that I agree with you entirely is if this is your first Loretta's, throw every expectation of results out the window and throw on an expectation of doing your absolute best for yourself. It doesn't matter what place you get. You might be going to the first time ever as a C rider and hoping to win titles, and you might win a title. That's awesome. You should have that expectation. But the reality is your goal, if you're trying to become successful in this sport, and if you're trying to become successful in sport, that's probably why you're going to Loretta's. right? So if that's your goal, your overarching big picture goal is to become successful in this sport, that plan looks like let's get better every single time we go. Wherever we're at. If we're a first place guy, we still got to get better. We got to go to pro. If we're a 40th place guy, we got to get a lot better if we want to go pro, right? So I agree with you entirely. If it's your very first time, I would take everything coach has to say here coming up physiologically to heart. And then number two, as a family, I would go there and say, hey, our number one goal is to leave here with my kid desperately wanting to come back and I had a blast of a time, not a terrible time, not dad and mom yelling and screaming.
Exactly.
Not about his results. At the end of the day, you're going to finish where you're going to finish. And I say this all the time when parents come to me and say, well, he rides so much better. I'm like, we see what you are on race day.
Yeah.
If you're unhappy with that, then go home and work on it. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, you are exactly where you are at Loretta's. And you can have circumstances. You can have a bike failure. You can have a crash. You can have a this or that. But guess what? Title winners don't have those problems. So you're going to have to figure out how those guys avoid those problems. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I agree. First time at Loretta's, have a blast.
Have a blast.
Second time at Loretta's, be better than the previous time.
Yep.
If it's your third time at Loretta's, hey, you're getting pretty serious at this darn sport. Maybe you are trying to chase it as a career. Now you need to start thinking about how the heck do I get myself up front? If you've been at Loretta's 3 times and you're not anywhere near the top 10, you really need to sort this out.
Absolutely. And that's why I say that goals are not relevant. People get a little offended when I say that. Because if you were to go down the starting grid, gate 1 to gate 42, hey, what's your goal? They're all going to say the same thing. I want to win. Okay, so the goal is pretty obvious. But the problem is let's take your illustration. If you've been to Loretta's 4 times and you haven't won 3 times already, is the goal changed? No. It's the frustrations. I like the way you keep articulating it, is sorted out. Well, to me, in the physiology world, we can only sort out the frustrations that have kept us from winning. If we're good at starts, all right, that's probably going to be on your positive attribute side. Just continue to get good starts. But if you maybe racecraft, maybe the fact that the track gets baked and there's no track that on the face of the earth that gets as rough as that place does. I think that's just a given, right? So if you put all those pieces and parts together, go and address your frustrations from the first time you went to the second, train to the specificity of that. That's something that we focus on with all of our athletes. If you're good at starts, we still practice starts, but that's not what's keeping you from winning. You get the whole shot and you fade. Well, that's called muscular endurance. If you're a late race diesel engine like Blake Baggett and you negative split the moto, but you always run out of time, let's work on your sprint speed because that's clearly your biggest physical limit.
Identify weaknesses and improve them.
That's 100%. Exactly
100%. Imagine if you're building a character in a video game and you have that, career mode or whatever that some of these kids have. Well, guess what? You go work in that game on the attributes that are weak.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And so if you don't do that as a motocross rider, you will never be successful. And I think Andrew Short talked very heavily on that in our episode with him.
But think about this from a physiological standpoint, and it's going to sound like a cliche. Some people will write it down and commit it to memory. Some will scoff at it. Until I can convert your weaknesses to strengths, and then you go race your strengths to expose others' weaknesses, you'll never be a champion. No. If you don't think that matters or is relevant, look at Deegan and look at Jet. You go and listen to Jace with Gypsy Tales with Brian Deegan. Brian said, look, we evaluated what that 250 class consisted of. We set some benchmarks and said we have to be better than this, this, and this. To our surprise, we were better than they were.
They said they came in over-prepared, right?
Over-prepared.
And
what
that's
a nice
great,
problem.
But it also tells you a lot of issues, right? So
yes.
Now, so that's number one, expectations. We said this on another show. I said set realistic expectations. I know you're a family, you want to win, you have great but I look at it like this, and I'll bet you if somebody could data filter this, maybe we'll find somebody to go do this for us.
Mm-hmm.
Go take the regional championship results across the U.S. and pretty much top 6 go, right? And then if you multiply that by, I think, 6 or 7 regions?
Yeah,
so
6
or 7 regions. So if you got third, multiply your finish, your overalls at your regional by 6 or 7, and that's probably going to be your Loretta's result, plus or minus 2 results.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are some strong regions, right? We have some regions where just all the heavy championship guys there, a third place guy's there. You were a third place guy. I get that. That happens occasionally. But at the end of the day, if you're 4th, 5th, 6th at your regional, odds are coming into Loretta's, a realistic expectation for you would be to finish 6 or 7 times what your regional result was. Now, that stings for a lot of people to hear that.
Absolutely.
Right? Oh, I'm better than that. We're going to be better than that. I'm like, yeah, but every other kid's saying that from every other region in the U.S. too. I want to be top 20. I want to be top 10. I want to be top 5. Whatever it is that it is.
Sure.
And guess what? This is a competitive sport. There's fast kids all over the world. I mean, in the pro ranks, who's that kid who came over from Australia and raced the 450 class? A 3-digit dude in the top 10.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't think that's a wake-up call for some of the fastest amateurs that the U.S. ever saw? It's like, hey, there's some guy from Australia who's also pretty damn good.
Exactly.
So there's people good all over the world. So at the end of the day, that to me is come in with an expectation that's realistic and then try to better that expectation. Okay, great. You know what? We're about a 30th place dude at Loretta's, or we're about a 15th, or about an 8th. I would really like for you to be 5th, 6th, or 7th, because that would be killer for us, because you came in qualified 4th, you came in qualified 3rd, you came in qualified 2nd. Man, if we have a hell of a Loretta's, you'll be this position.
Yep.
And that should be where, unfortunately, I don't know how parents get in this mode where they just don't. What is your thought on that? How do they put this, in the wrong perspective?
Well, unfortunately, they get duped by riding coaches. They get duped by the marketing of the amateur series that, and we could take this conversation a couple different ways. The numbers don't lie, as I've been quoted on saying on the CBS special with Dunge, right? I live in a world of zeros and ones, the same way that you're talking about measurable metrics. If we look at your strength to weight ratios in January and I compare them to August, there's going to be some percentage of improvement. It could have been, let's not be negative. It's 7%. Well, you're going to argue that it could have been 8%. And I'm going to say, you're right. Why wasn't it? Did you not take nutrition seriously? Did consistency become an issue? Did you become complacent? Heaven forbid you get injured, right? We have stuff that can contribute to it. And there's a very, very distinct difference between an excuse and an explanation. Somebody T-boned you in the first turn and broke your right leg. That's not an excuse. The word is, essentially you broke your leg of no fault of your own. So when you go back to what we were originally talking about, coming in, not being absolutely smoked, that most people think about that as being physical. Think about, for those parents, when their child was 18 months old and was overtired, how fussy were they?
Right.
When they're undernourished, i.e. they're burning more calories.
It's obvious you saw that as a parent to a toddler.
Yes, but what's interesting is if you draw the parallel, an 18-month-old baby that's hungry and tired, now take that and compare that to your Loretta's Lens champion, and you're noticing that your rider is like having a hissy fit because the sky's opened up and it's muddy. They had a hissy fit because they stalled the bike in the mechanic's left-hand turn around the wall of champions. Shit that happens, right? So we have a saying in the physiology world, it's not what happens to you, it's how you handle it. Well, I like to back that train up a lot and say, wait a second, did your son or daughter come in mentally resilient? If so, they're rested and fed. If they're not, they're fuss buckets. They get irritated very easily. And if I'm racing you, Derek, and I notice that you get the 39th gate pick and you just have an absolute meltdown, I'm like, oh, hell yeah. Because he's off right now.
It's like your poker face. You don't have a good poker face.
You get 39, and you and I have talked about it before you got there, and you're like, all right, if I get the 39th gate pick, here's my strategy. I know I'm not going to be the first bike to the... Now, there's a caveat. If you're running a cheater motor and you think that you can out drag race somebody, and if I get the average person to think about there's 42 gates, I've heard different numbers. You may have it calculated, but I've heard it's anywhere between 11 and 13 yards longer from gates 30 or 31 out.
Right.
Then if you're just at the doghouse, not on the inside, just from the middle of the doghouse out, it's anywhere between 13 and 15 yards further.
Well, I'll give you a good example. You're 100% right. So every riding coach can do this, or who's worth their salt. I know David Bailey did it. It was like, hey, most beginner riders, new riders beginners or even decent riders, but haven't been trained yet, who avoid inside ruts, go outside all the time, and they think they're fast that way. And he says, all right, where's your lap time? Now go do all inside lines. And they might suck at them. They're usually still faster. Yep. Because you went the shortest way around the track.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, the same exact thing applies on starts. I was a great starter growing up. I was a great starter my whole life, my whole career. I mean, I'm full shot. You name it, I've whole shot them. And I'm just good at it. It was something I was good at. At the end of the day, when I picked gates, almost always it was as close to the inside to control the corner that I could pick. That was also the straightest, shortest path to the first turn. Mm-hmm. Guarantee you that will give you success most of the time. And then why you pick the inside?
Or statistically, at least a better chance.
Right. And there's some of those Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Excuse me.
I'll say there's sometimes those hero gate picks. Like, man, if I pick this outside gate pick, it is a little bit longer, but if I get everything perfect start and hang on to it, I can get around the corner faster. Yes, there are some tracks that works on. But what are the odds, unless you're just that good, of like always hitting that mark? And then what happens if you don't get it? Well, you're outside, you're farther away, you're going to be pushed out, bunched up in the first turn, and you're going to end up way back. So the shortest, straightest line on a start, like you said, always going to give you the high success. And if you really look where hole shots come at most racetracks, which is something we should, by the way, if you're at Loretta's, go watch some damn starts.
Exactly.
See where the hole shots are coming from. I guarantee you they're going to be the same gates almost all week, number one. And number two, there's two reasons for that. One, it's the best gate pick. It's the shortest, straightest, best distance to the first turn. But number two, a lot of times what happens is, and I've seen this all the time, is the really good gates have good starters who get good starts and get good ruts. And that's a huge aspect of Loretta's. So you're going to have to not just pick that, but you're going to have to manage the best rut in front of and around the gate.
But put those two things together, though. Put those two things together. A rider comes to Loretta's tired, hungry, dehydrated. They have no mental resiliency. They're physically exhausted because they've been ground to a nub, grinding out 20-minute motos. And I've even heard some people are wearing sweatshirts. That's not heat acclimatization. That's a fast track to heat exhaustion and heat stroke. So you put those two together. If I'm racing against someone that's gone and has been grinding, right? They're on social media. They're showing all their Strava numbers off the motorcycle. They're showing all their hour meters. They're showing lap times, right? I'm smiling from ear to ear because I'm like, this is awesome. This guy is going to come in a complete pile of rubble because he's mentally and physically left his best efforts. And I'll change the subject, but I want to come back to the start at Loretta's just real quick. If I take one of my top professional triathletes 3 weeks out from Ironman Hawaii, 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike and a marathon run, 3 weeks out, I'm doing a full triathlon, full Ironman distance at race pace. I would be booted out of the industry as a human performance coach. So fast my head would spin.
And on top of that,
good.
I'll say on top of that, in that industry, it's so well known, right? Even though I've seen that new people, like people who are gung-ho, hard workers, they screw up. But when they have a person like yourself, it's so well known. But like what you're going to allude to, I'm assuming, is how come it's not that known in the motocross industry? I mean, you're basically laying out like the best secret that there ever is, and yet people continually miss this.
And that's why I said earlier, it's about perspective. Don't do more, do less. Swim upstream, swim against what everybody else is doing. It makes it very easy. I do want to come back because it ties in together numerically, right? So I have all my athletes going there saying, I'm going to get a 40th gate pick. And we already have
that's the mental expectation. You know what? Guess what my first gate pick pull was at Loretta's? The 1 year I got to go, I blew my shoulder out before I went. Didn't realize I'd blown my shoulder out. Equipment was already there. I did it 3 days before we left. So I'm like, I'm going. I should have given it up to some alternate or something. But long and short, guess what my first gate pick pull was?
I'm going to guess 39 for some
42.
Reason. Oh, shoot.
I literally got the worst gate pull you can get. I was like, you got to be shitting me.
Yeah.
But like at the end of the day, the funny part was I'm a good starter. I believe in that. And so I'm like, I'm going to get a good start. And I had an awesome jump. Like, I'm like, oh, dude, there's nobody near me. Okay, click gears.
Yep.
If you're out there, I mean, I probably was into the first turn, fourth or fifth or something like that, but you are way out there at Loretta. So I do recommend that you do not end up out there if you can do it. But like you said,
what if you get it?
Expectation.
That first moto, when we're looking at the statistical odds, everybody has a chance of pulling 30 or worse, right? Yeah. And when this individual has an engineering background like you did, he went to Google Earth, he measured, dropped the pins, and he measured it all. 13 to 15 yards further, when you've got to figure when the pin moves, you're already rolling. You transition over the gate beautifully in a straight line. You nail the grab of the second shift. You shift to the back of the bike. You've got to go 13 to 15 yards further, right? And I want everybody to stop and think about this. Where are 99% of the wrecks?
First turn.
Always on the outside going into the infield. That's where all the carnage goes. Yep. And yet you've got people that will try to out-drag race and then get frustrated that, the herd just shifts outward. Next thing you know, you're getting pushed out. Now, I'm not saying do like the MXGP guys do where you let the gate drop and go to the inside.
No, I wouldn't do that in the rest either.
But you got to have some strategy.
You got to have a strategy, right?
But what happens if you get pushed out there, to your point, and now there's a big pile up?
Well, I'm going to tell you what I would do if I did it all over again.
Well, and I think the listeners would love to hear it because somebody's going to get a 39.
Controversial, and guess what? Until Loretta's wishes to police this accurately, you should do it. I've watched people do it over and over again. Hop off the track, go around the banners, and hop back on as fast as you can safely. But do not allow yourself to get crashed.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't do it.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, if you've genuinely been pushed off, you are genuinely allowed to be off. But I'm just telling you right now that it's not worth running it up into those banners that will be there too. And going over the handlebars or doing something stupid like that. But at the end of the day, I've seen people cheat that really bad. Like they'll go off, actually get an advantage, come out ahead. And I've never seen Loretta's police it. I've never seen it happen. Because they'll always say is, well, did you have it on video? It's like, no, I didn't have it on video. I'm just telling you what the guy did. So if you're out there, I'm not saying for your athletes that this is the right, if you're trying to win a title, you probably should stay away from this. Although Deegans have done stuff like this, and the Lessies, I'm sure, have done stuff like this, right?
Yep.
Cocker did stuff like this.
It's a matter of playing within the parameters that you've got to deal with. And if you think that like I said earlier, unless you know you're running a cheater motor, how can you look yourself in the mirror and think that mathematically you can out drag a race? You can.
I put myself out of a lot of work here, and I'm joking. I will, but I won't. Is we did the math one time. Mm-hmm. Okay, what's 5 horsepower and an 85 worth in a drag race? And then we went out and drag raced. Okay, this bike makes 5 horsepower. We took a super mini and an 85 at this time frame. All right.
For what was the distance of the drag race?
It's pathetically low.
Okay.
I almost quit the business right when I started my business. I was telling my dad, Dad, how can I be in business if this is the difference? And he's like, well, would you rather be? So basically what we calculated out on it was something like half a bike length over, if everything was equalized, everything's perfect, you hit your shifts right. Believe it or not, it's not that much. And I think we came down with something like 6 or 8 feet or something like that over the course of probably 5 gear shifts. And I have to go back and look at my math and my spreadsheet and go, this was 15 years ago.
So that's 5th gear tapped?
That'd be like, what's the difference in this acceleration? Right now, top speed is a different discussion.
Right.
Horsepower really shows its legs on top speed. This is something that's hard to describe to people. So really long start straights is where you will see horsepower differences between motorcycles.
Okay.
When it comes to short starts, it's almost all rider and execution. You have to have a bike that will go when you go, right? Like some bikes bog, some bikes.
Sure.
You have to have that. But at the end of the day, that's almost all rider execution and technique. But as like Millville this weekend, that long start straight, if you watch that above you kind of start to see at the end of the straight, some of those private bikes are kind of hanging back and some of the factory bikes are really starting to stretch their legs. Yeah. The point is, though, that I could give you a full-blown 112 and you line up in the 85 mod class and you're the 42nd gate pick. If you don't do everything perfectly, you will not pull that whole shot.
And see, it's funny you say that because and like you said, I don't mind sharing a little bit of the conversation that I have with some of my riders. If you know, because I hear this complaint every year, Loretta's is all about the start. It's like Supercross at Minios, right? It's all about the start. So I simply ask them, how many starts have you been practicing? How many clutch baskets have you gone through?
Yep.
How much have you played with the gearing and tried a 3rd gear start? I try and question everything.
Every aspect you can try.
Absolutely. But what's interesting is I've done performance camps all around the world. And when we get to the subject of starts, and I'm not trying to embarrass anybody who's participated in any of our performance camps, I go, how many of you have a strategy for 2nd gear shift? And never once do I have somebody who has raised their hand. Not once.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we've talked a little bit about this on the show before, working with Ashley Filick, who was deaf. She could feel when those RPMs were starting to sign off and she would never allow it to run out of power. But most people, now, again, this is what's difficult. You've got to go to Loretta's. What's the distance? Are you practicing? I don't know. Do you know by chance from the gate to the apex of the first turn? Is that,
what's tough about Loretta's, it's fairly short.
Yeah.
But it's so ripped up and deep, it feels long because you're under load for a long time. That's what makes it unique. So also, are you practicing starts under those conditions?
That's my point. When you're looking at race day simulation, it's got to be literal. Now, I'm not saying everybody's got to go get a dozer and rip it 12 inches deep, but you can't practice on hard packed concrete and then go there and then wonder what the heck happened because I see people, they'll grab that second, they'll get over the transition. And Derek, how many times have you seen, and I'm not trying to embarrass anybody who may have actually did this at Loretta's, how many times have you seen the gate drop and the person didn't start the motorcycle?
Yeah.
I've seen that every single year that I've been there because especially on the bigger bikes where you just have the constant rumbling.
Yep.
And you're telling yourself when you're blipping the throttle, you think you feel it, but you're actually feeling the bikes beside you.
I have a procedure
and the guy's sitting there.
Right. We do a test. And so I've had guys leave it in neutral by accident. You clicked it, you just didn't get it. Right.
Yep.
So when we practice starts here for kids that I'm like trying to make, one of our first things is you click it into gear.
Yep.
And you test the clutch.
Yep.
And you feel the bike. And there's 2 reasons for that. Number 1, am I in damn gear? All right, exactly. I'm in gear. And I loaded it so if it was halfway in, like I don't know how the mechanical side of that works. I was just showing that to the kid who's working here this summer. He's going to be an engineering student, so he's loving life. Like he's
awesome.
Like, I'm learning this and that. You can find a false neutral between every single gear. It's how those shift pawls work. And so if you load your transmission and it actually hadn't fully gone into gear on your shifting pawl, it can hop out. So load your transmission, right? Number 2 is, okay, I'm in gear. Number 3, it's actually in gear. And then the next part is you get to feel your engagement point a little bit. Yeah. Right. Okay. I'd feel, yeah. I get a
fresh clutch.
Right. But don't smoke it. Don't sit there and line it up and get that clutch cooking hot because it's going to be moving your point. Right. So you just got to feel it. Okay. It works. And then, we try to do that I always tell my guys, I like to do that whenever you like to put your bike in gear, which needs to be early enough for you to do these steps. So typically maybe the 30-second board would be kind of my suggestion, whatever that is for that particular event. And then, of course, once the board goes sideways, you do your procedure. But yeah, that's one of the tips we have. You should make damn sure that your bike is willing to go. Otherwise,
absolutely. Yep. And how many times have you seen people thought they put it in second, actually put it in first?
It happens.
And then
especially after a sight lap. Especially after a sight lap. That sight lap will screw up your entire start procedure.
Your whole routine.
You've never done it.
That's right.
So that's something you need to account for is you're going to go up there and pack that whole gate for 15 minutes while that moto's on the line. I forgot. It's funny. I never thought of sharing this before, right? But it's a part of Loretta's. You're going to pack that damn gate. You're going to be up there and you're going to be ready to go and it's going to be awesome. And then your rider's going to go do a practice start. And now you have 5 minutes at max to get that gate re-prepped, repacked, ready to go. And now they're going to come in and all of a sudden their bike's super hot. You've got other guys to deal with when they're coming in and out of the gate. You're going to be feeling like you're in a rush. And on top of that, they might want to switch their goggles or they might have a comment they say or whatever they're going to say.
Yep.
So
you're fanning them down and you're putting an umbrella
to be prepared for this. And so one of the things I have with that is I do not want to be the last one in the gate personally. I want to have the time to get my gate process together. So part of my sight lap concept is, hey, I'm not going to be last. I want to have enough time to make sure. But then number 2 is when you're in the gate, don't be too ready too soon, right? There's some dude who's still probably going to be circulating that sight lap last, and you don't get yourself just so amped up and so crazy. I see it all the time where people overheat their bikes sitting there on the line.
Oh, yeah.
If I'm ready to go and they're not 30-second boarding me, and nowadays with electric start, my bike's off.
Kill the engine. Absolutely.
Yeah. These are little details that are very important.
And it's funny you say that. You've seen the factory mechanics will do a sight lap and they've got that thermos of ice cold fluid. Yeah. Right. So how many athletes come in and they hit their energy fuel that's ice cold? You've just lowered the core body temperature. You've topped off on sugar and electrolyte. I'm not saying drink 20 ounces of it, but just the same way that the mechanic's topping off your race fuel, that race fuel is ice cold in a thermos because that pulls down the temperature of the motor. You do the same thing for the human body. But to your point, people, they're all in disarray. And I always say this when we do performance camps. What is your routine? If you practice starts by just rolling in the gate and dropping the clutch and going, well, we've done, I don't want to, don't take this out of context. I'll rephrase it. I've seen Tiger Woods at the driving range, right? He pulls a ball out, he opens his hand, he re-grips, gets his shoulders set, gets his feet set, swings, lets go of the club, grabs another ball, resets. And I say with all my clients, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So if you come in and you push your gloves back, you hit your chest, you do. I don't care if you're Jeremy Martin and you lick your palm. I don't care what you do, but when you practice your starts, do it the same way every time. And it's way beyond the scope of today's podcast, but it's the idea of muscle memory in your brain, not muscle memory, what most people think about. If Tiger hits the ball 12 different ways, his brain doesn't know which way he wants to hit the ball. You got to figure out what works. That's like how we say, when are you going to grab your second shift? And something that I've seen happen quite often, Dad will go ahead and add a tooth to the rear sprocket because he thinks it needs a little more pop out of that left-hander before mechanics. Doesn't tell little Johnny, well, when you added that tooth to the rear sprocket, you just move the rear wheel forward in the swing arm. Now little Johnny's sitting in the same seat where he normally does. All of a sudden he's loop out Larry because the rear wheels come up 1/4 of an inch, or what would that be, a 30-second? That doesn't take much, as you know.
No, and it makes a huge difference.
Well, then all of a sudden little Johnny didn't move his bum up forward a little. So instead of getting the hookup like he normally gets, he gets a little bit more weight in the back. Next thing he sees is the fender. He's double clutching, and he's loop out Larry and takes 4 guys with him. And I've seen that over and over again where Dad will make an adjustment to the bike and then not go practice. Like, okay, Johnny, we added a tooth. Where normally you could pull that long gear, you're going to have to shift 2 more times to get, because your bike's going to accelerate like a beast, but it's going to sign off quicker if you don't quick shift that bike. Now, that doesn't mean that we want you to smoke the clutch.
No.
But when you're pulling that 3rd gear start, you might have to barely fan that clutch just a smidge to get that, but you're not going to have to grab the second. Like how many parents, and again, if you don't
how are you
know
going
as a
through this,
parent,
right? And like you said, practicing starts. I'll give you my one secret to practicing starts that I think I see this as the wrong way to do it all the time. And I've worked with so many. I mean, this is how everybody practices starts. All right, let's go do practice starts. Okay, you do your procedure. Even if you're really good about doing the same procedure, you go do one. Well, what inevitably happens? Kid comes right around, immediately lines up again and does it again.
Yep.
Okay, so the two questions I always ask people is, and most of the time their first start sucks.
Yes.
So I'm like, all right, that was your race start. What do you mean that was a race start? Well, that's exactly what you're going to do on race day because that was the very first one you did. Why did you treat this very first start you did when you were practicing starts like the one that was going to get the whole shot? If you can't do it cold turkey, if you've been practicing starts your whole life and racing your whole life, if your very first start on practice day is not about perfect, then you're not there.
That's right.
And so you need to simulate the pressure, the conditions, the requirements that you're going to have on race day. And you only get, like even on a sight lap day at Loretta's, I see this too all the time. They do a perfect sight lap start. Then they get out of their comfort zone. They get up there on the line and they're a little rushed or a little off procedure, a little this or that. And then their second one is trash, right? You ruined your good one almost per se, right? You didn't like throw it out gene out of the bottle. But the point is on practice day, you have to apply the pressure to yourself on starts that is going to simulate that of race day and have the accountability of race day. Essentially, I tell my guys, I'm like, all right, this has to be perfect. We're going to do this one. We've been practicing. We've got all the technique. You did really good starts yesterday at the end of the day. All 5 in a row were awesome. Okay, today, start 1 has to be like that. And if you don't get it right, there has to be some form of punishment, some form of accountability because I don't want you to do that again. And so that's something as a parent you need to understand is when you're going at these facilities or wherever and they're just lining you up in the gate, just lining you around and around and you're practicing over and over again. Yes, you're going to get better when you do 6 in a row. Yeah. If you want to be better, right? But that's not how race day works.
No, exactly. And when you talk about the word pressure, I don't even believe that there's a such thing as pressure because nobody wants to win more than that young athlete for the most part. There's some moto dads that are living vicariously through your children, but for the most part, nobody wants to win more than that child. Nobody will be more disappointed. So it comes back to the idea of practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And then we can sit and talk about it in practice. It's Saturday morning. You're tied for the championship. How do you emulate that type of condition? It's called the familiarity principle. You've got to mentally put yourself there to validate exactly. I agree with you 100%. If you don't practice putting yourself in that situation, I'll use the P word, right? If you're not practicing putting that pressure on yourself, even though I don't believe it exists, because I think champions, well, I know for a fact, champions gravitate towards the process associated with the enjoyment of winning. That requires a huge paradigm shift. That's why I do so much mental training with my riders. Yeah, physically, if you're consistent, void of injury, void of sickness or illness, yeah, you're going to get physically better. It's a law of averages. But when it comes to mentally being prepared, I need to make sure that your mental muscle grows on par with your physical. So when you get into that situation, I'm going to give a little bit of our trade secrets away here, but when you recognize fear, you've immediately got to catch yourself and say, I'm focusing on something I can't control. I can't control what Derek does. I can only control what I have. So when my athlete's in the gate, he or she shouldn't be able to tell me who's to the left or the right. It's irrelevant.
That is irrelevant.
The back of the jersey is irrelevant. I will even go so far, regardless of what size bike you're on, but the younger, the more it applies. Those 42 riders, you're going to see 20 of those at A1 when you go pro. So you might as well get used to it. You're going to race against them the rest of your career.
It's crazy how that works, right? But go back, look at Loretta's results in 65 or 85's classes, go back 20 years. Yep. And then go look at the names of riders you think you recognize. And you're going to be like, oh, wow, like 5 of these people are big time dudes and 10 of these people were on the gate for the next 5 years. You know, it's like clockwork. So,
and how many like the Braswelds of the world who watched pros and now is lining up next to them?
Well, and to do that, like that's got to be tough, right? But you have to take that step and you got to do it early on. You have to
my problem is are you surprised that you're lining up next to Sexton when you're Caden Braswell in the pro sport class? You're not going pro in 5 more years. You're going pro now. 3 weeks.
Yeah. No, so exactly. No, the funny part is like in his situation, he trained with Chase. There you go. For him, that's like, okay, I know where I'm at versus Chase, right?
But that validates the familiarity principle.
Right.
If he's never ridden with them,
so when he goes up against Kenny, he's like, well, how does Kenny ride?
Because he doesn't know, right?
Exactly.
Which goes back to perfect practice makes perfect. And if you know, that's why I think riding coaches are absolutely worth their weight in gold. Because if you can learn the nuances, everything from where you put your bum, RPMs, clutch setup, how much pressure you're putting on the front brake, all of the little nuances that go into it. That riding coach knows you probably better than yourself.
Unfortunately, right? Just like your dad or whatever. Yep.
But that's where, unfortunately, when the kids start to get good, they get cocky and arrogant and they're too cool for school.
Yep.
When you've got a Ben Riddle who's shown you everything that you need to do and you go from good to great, then when you go from great to champion, you get too cool for school.
Yep.
Then Ben's over here pulling his hair out going, why won't you listen? You listened for 3 years, but now you're too cool. And that's probably one of the biggest frustrations in our sport as a whole.
We talked about it already. I don't know how the Lawrences are doing it. I don't know what Dazzy has figured out. I have had conversations with him about this, and nothing was secret or special, specialty or something I couldn't share, but I didn't really glean anything spectacular. It's a mentality somehow that he has managed to get out of them to say, hey, you're going to take constructive criticism. You're going to accept it, and we're going to get better because I'm not here to break you down. I'm here to build you up. Whatever that process is. And I don't know how that is. That's how coaches need to, riders need to understand this. Coach is here to get the best out of you, not your worst. Yeah. And if you can't understand that and you're going to butt heads with your coach, you'll never be successful.
Well, that's where I think it's an Australian thing, because we've been fortunate. We've taught camps there. We've been to Australia 3 different times, and it's amazing. I mean, there's a difference between being verbally abusive and just being matter of fact. And the Australians are very matter of fact. Europeans are. For that matter. It's no BS. It's very zeros and ones. We have a riding coach, Richard McEwen, in Ireland, and he's actually working with the Ireland junior team there. And he's an MXGP guy. His dad owns Desert Martin. It's been on the MXGP circuit. But they just don't mince words. Like, you're not doing this correct. And nobody gets all butt hurt. Nobody gets
let's go work on it. Yeah.
It's like, dude, like when we were working with Josh Gilbert, his riding coach, is one of the best riding coaches of all times and a multi-time world champion. And it's one of those, you look at that and you're like, okay, are you going to argue with Stefan Everts when you're Liam Everts, when his dad's the winningest rider in history?
And it's hard to not, but you shouldn't.
But then we get into the Lawrence brothers. When you look at, I go back to Gypsy or Whiskey Throttle, when Dazzy was on there, and he just looked at Hunter and says, you have to win because we sold everything. Now, you could joke at that at some. It seems a little heavy for some Americans. What I think is interesting is you go back to that textbook cliche, the mother of invention is necessity, right? And that's where, in my world of human performance, I'll say all the time, I have much more success with somebody who's on a shoestring budget, who appreciates that's turning his tires backwards to get a little bit of extra mileage out of him. That child, that young rider, that doesn't have a lot of extra, that person goes the furthest.
Well, unfortunately, I have plenty. I'll put it in a way that a lot of these people watching the show can understand from my business standpoint. And I hope they'll understand how other businesses work too, is the clients I need are the ones that have a lot of money. That's what pays the bills. I need you to want to build the baddest motor you can build, like the best motor you can build. Yep. And that's how I pay my bills. The margins are thin in this industry. So, if you have 3 or 4 bikes, you have 5 or 6, like that's how we make a living. We go find a couple, I say we find, really clients find us. Yep. And a couple of them have those needs. And that's literally what pays our bills. And then basically the rest of it is like, it's like you said, a lot of these other people in the industry don't have that money. And so they're like, hey, what can I get for the best value? Hey, this is what you need. And we offer, that's our most popular package, right? That's the package that is most people are going to buy. But what I'm getting at is that I agree with you. I see it all the time that the families that have the most, the absolute most often the kid doesn't quite get there. And I'm not quite sure 100% why that is, because they have the resource, they have everything they need to be successful, and then some. I think they have more than they realize they have. A lot of these amateurs have better programs than they're going to go on to when they go pro. And they don't even know that. They don't know how much of a crap show the pro teams really are. They're not as good as you think they are in some ways, right?
Yes.
So but it's also that, like you said, Hunter needed this to survive. And I think you ultimately, if you ever want to really win at this sport, desperately want to win, like, at the top, you got to want it deep down inside, like you want air, like Will Smith says. And that's hard. You can't just instill that in a kid. You either have that or you don't.
My experience has been, and I hope this doesn't offend the listeners, but my experience has been, if I've got a dad who started a business from scratch, And, you know, he knows what those 20-hour days look like. He knows when you didn't have the phone ringing, and this business is now, they can't keep up with demand. You know, they've got 5 trucks on the road. They've got 100 employees. He's nothing but managing headaches. When they get access to your and I's type of services, they appreciate the value for the time for the money for the quality attached to the result. And like you say, there's very, very wealthy people out there that have earned it.
Yes.
And they spend money like they don't have it. That's the best client.
That is the best, right? And
because their son or daughter is like, I don't care that we have the luxury of traveling in a Provost.
Right.
You still are going to be required. There's an expectation that the work is going to be, and I don't care if you're on a 65, 85, or 20,
100%.
That entrepreneurial mom or dad is like, look, you need to understand work ethic. That's what got us to where we're at.
Yep.
That's the perfect client.
Well, they are.
We're talking,
unfortunately,
3rd, 4th generation. Those are the dangerous ones.
100% right. I was to say, and I went to say earlier was, what you'll find in this industry is that a lot of trainers, a lot of facilities, and a lot of race shops will go identify, hey, he's got a Renegade. I'm going to go hustle up their business.
Okay. I never thought about that. That's
right.
I never thought
and they'll just go, okay. And they're going to go target those individuals. So when you have somebody walk up to you that says, hey, I can really take your program to the next level. I mean, you know, your kid's really got what it takes. And you're going, yeah. Meanwhile, your kid got 35th. Yep. You need to question your motives.
That's a great point.
If you've got good finances and money and it shows, and then some guy comes up to you asking you for your money and a lot of it, and basically sells you the world, you gotta, Americans are susceptible to this. I don't know what the deal is. I've seen it a lot, but I don't think when I do work for people in other parts of the world, this part I love about getting to test our product.
Yeah.
My product can always be better, right? We're always learning every single day. But that said, we test the shit out of it here. So I know that what I'm going to sell you will do exactly what I said it will do.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, there's something wrong, right? Like something didn't go right. So I have clients in Europe that will say, hey, I don't know. Here's a motor, Australia, Europe, whatever. We'll send them exactly what it is. They'll ask me what it is. They're like, well, so-and-so said that I was going to get so much. I'm like, look, we can't get those kinds of numbers. We're not in that ballpark. I'm going to give you this. They'll go buy it. We'll hit those numbers and they'll actually test it. I don't see this in America ever. And I don't get it. They'll go rent some dyno time. They'll go dyno our products and they'll do what we said they'll do. Sometimes that's a little bit. Sometimes that's a lot. Depends on your package. The funny part is they'll go buy from you name it. And those shops will say, oh, I'm going to get you 8, 9, 10 horsepower or whatever. And they'll make a half a horse or a quarter horse. And they went and spent $8 grand, 9 grand, 10 grand. I mean, it happens all the time.
Sure.
So now, as a client, you don't want to hear, this is why these shops do it. You don't want to hear, yeah, I'm going to get you 2 horsepower. That's it? Yeah. That's what that'll get you. You want to get 3? Well, that's another 2 grand. You want to get 4? That's probably not possible. Whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
You want to hear, 7? Yeah, give me 7. How much? Okay, let's go, right? You don't want to hear, because you're hearing abroad amongst your people at the racetracks who have never taken a bike to the dyno, never tested the products that they've purchased, have no clue what they're talking about, but you're hearing that parent say, yeah, our bike makes 10 more horsepower. We spent 12 grand with so-and-so. And you're like, well, I need to make 10 more horsepower. Well, are they making 10 more horsepower, right? Like that's something the American fans, I wish would kind of like, hey, I have a dyno that sits here. I mean, I use it almost every day.
Yep.
But it's available. You can just rent it. I don't need to look at what you do on it.
Right.
You want to validate your products. You want to see what you bought. You want to make sure your jetting's right. You want to make sure this fuel works. You want to make sure your ECU's pretty good. Come run the damn thing.
Yeah.
It sits here, and there's shops all over the country with the same damn thing sitting in their shop. There's Harley shops and car shops and motorcycle shops and dirt bike shops. Validate it. So I got off topic. I was going to say...
No, you're not off topic at all.
We came into getting overtrained for essentially as a topic there, right? Early on.
Well, it's that mental and physical resiliency to deal with adversity, whether you get a bad gate pick or just things don't go your way.
Right.
I always try to say that, and I have this for everybody who's a client of mine, you're going to be nodding your head because we've had this conversation a zillion times. You can't win Loretta's on Tuesday, but you can lose it.
100%.
And, you've got 10 laps. So if you're somebody who is a fantastic starter and you just, you shit the bed on the start, you miss your second shift or somebody cups over on you, multitude of things that can happen, right? Please don't give up on the first lap.
No.
And also don't throw it away. We had a guy in the pro sport class, doesn't matter what year it was, it's irrelevant. Great starter, but just like I just articulated, just really had a bad start, had a great gate pick, but just got squeezed out. Comes around over the tunnel jump in like 22nd, 23rd place, freaks the flip out, flat lands the bike, blows the subframe out, and took a foot peg right through the abdomen and had to have stitches.
Week's over.
The very first lap of the very first race of the week. Now put that together. Obviously, when you're listening to this podcast, you're like, well, who would do that?
A lot of people will do that.
Because dads, you're stepping on everyone's throat, right? Yep. We've mortgaged the farm. You got to win. It's 5 days of racing, 3 moto format. You've got 10 laps, right? So let's all sit down as mature adults here.
Well, if you're fit and you know you're fit, this is not the end of the world.
And that track has plenty of places to pass if you've got racecraft. So if you're listening to this and that's one of your biggest limitations is that you're mad at your rider because he or she follows the leader, then you just told me what they need to be working on. Go get 4 or 5 friends and go work riding in and out of groups. Work on going through, because you told me that's your frustration. And then you could continue to take that, right? You've got 5 days of racing. And the person that always comes to mind is Zach Freeberg. When I was working with AC was on Super Minis riding for Pro Circuit, and Zach was the pro. And Ronnie Tishner was kind enough. He hired me to work with Zach Freeberg, Zach Commons, and AC. That was the trio that trained at Waldo. Ronnie was kind enough. Those were my guys. And, Zach Freeberg, the year that he won the Pro Sport class, I think his best finish out of 3 motos was 3rd. Don't hold me to it, but I think he went 7.53 or something really odd. And he won the title. And I always use that illustration because if I'm going to sit down with a parent and you came there and let's just say, as you said earlier, you come in with expectations, you think you're top 3. Okay. Well, first moto, you got a 7th. Well, if you sit around and you piss and you moan and you groan, that's why I always use the Billy Joel song. It's either sadness or euphoria. And I've been very public on other podcasts. This is why, like even this year, Michaela and I will not fly in until Thursday because the race week doesn't even begin until Thursday. Right. You've got 5 days of negotiating rather, the highs and the lows, the good and the bad, the dries and the wet, the mud and the heat, the humidity, blah, 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 blah. Well, show me 1 year that it has not been hot and humid. Never once.
And it's funny you say that. Like for me, there's been plenty of years because we live in Texas, but in Florida, right? But the reality is it's going to be a slap in your face if you're not from one of these regions on how hot and humid it can be.
Right.
Like you said. So you just have to bank on that. And then number 2, historically, and there were a few years that it wasn't. I mean, it's been unbelievable that there wasn't. It's going to have some mud races.
Absolutely.
That is Loretta's lens. That's what builds champions and title winners at that particular track. Go ask Aaron Plester why he's got a pro career. He came out of nowhere as a private B rider and dominated in the mud because he was good in the mud. That got him a pro ride.
Well, so, look at this past weekend, right? Yep. The 250s are lining up. Skies open up. Who prevails?
Yep.
Some people will say Casey Cochran getting second, leading over half that moto was going to be luck. Oh, I don't care. Well, luck is where hard work meets opportunity.
Now, he took advantage of it.
Yeah. He took advantage of it. Now the ball's in his court. If he can come back and he can back it up,
well, but you know what?
Momentum shifter.
I fight this with Caden, and we know this, right? But basically, he's a different type of athlete. He's I wouldn't say slow, he's like a diesel in the sense that he's a very consistent athlete. He has a very high top end speed if he can get it out of him, right? Like it's there. We've seen him multiple times. He's been the fastest guy at the track. But at the pro ranks, that one performance for Casey has secured him next year.
It's like Jalik Swole, the year he won.
Right, that one time. So what I tell, and this is what I wanted to talk about, we were talking about here for Loretta's in particular.
Yes.
So one of the things you have to understand as a parent is why are you here? And if it's to be a pro, okay, well then we have these goals, these expectations where we want to go. But one of the things you should not do is if 100%, look, we're just not quite there in fitness. My kid cannot go 20s. Well, but if your kid has that top end speed, you better go out and show that. Hey, it's okay. It's okay. This year, you're not there. You're still young. Let's say you're an 85 kid. You go out, you show that top end speed for a couple laps. You put down those lap times. I promise you that goes a long way. But don't sit there and hamstring them and beat them up. You're not fit enough, and this just sucks. We're going to get
you suck. Yeah.
Go get that top end speed. Put that down. Show those lap times. Say, hey, what kind of, I don't care if you peter out with 3 or 4 to go. I want to see your best effort for what you got.
What's Mitch Payton say all the time? I can work with speed. That's what he says every time.
I don't agree with all of that 100%, but I will say that that's how the industry works. So don't hamstring your kid if he's not fit enough. Go show your speed. Go lay down a lap time that if you're like a top kid that you're trying to go sell your kid to one of these teams and say, look, my kid did this time. It's right here on this paper. I just need a little bit better. Okay. But if you're out there and you're like, all right, you suck. We're not going to get there. And then number 2, what's your feelings on I'm conflicted on this. I think you should ride, if you're new to Loretta's, ride every lap you can possibly get.
Absolutely. There's no track like it in the world.
So
There's
you
no
have
track
to
like
do
it.
it, right? So
Yes.
ride all your motos, stay there all the way to the end of the week. Like,
Absolutely.
get laps. On the flip side of that, I do not feel like if you're seriously injured, like if you're relatively like, this is holding us back significantly and he's way off, right? I think you should load up. I know you're there. I would say get laps, but if your kid can't put forth a 90% effort, you're just hamstringing your kid.
No, that's a very volatile question, because it goes without saying that the second injury is always significantly worse than the first because you didn't heal completely from the first. Now, when you're talking about like rehabbing a shoulder or a knee, that comment has a lot more bearing, because if somebody's ACL is not 100% back and it's unstable, it doesn't take very little to set it off. But when it pops it the second time, you're done. Like the season's over. And this is where, ironically, we can use Chase Hymas as an example, right? He blew out his ACL, taps out, goes and gets it surgically repaired, goes to rehab, does it correctly, and then he blows it out the first race of the new season. That's just the statistical odds. He isn't the first that's happened to, and it won't be the last. But he did it correctly, and that's where I give props to Lucas Myrtle and Mr. and Mrs. Hymas.
And that's like a choice, but as a parent,
yep,
you got to understand that you're winning nothing by getting 20th. I promise you.
No,
you're winning nothing by getting 10th. You're winning nothing by getting 5th in realities. I mean, that's a mental accomplishment, right?
That's where you're at. Yeah,
right.
That's
but
the expectation.
The fact of the matter is, if your kid's not able to put forth their best effort at Loretta's and you're still forcing them to go out there on a relatively serious injury, now I think you should go through adversity. I got a bruised and battered. I'm a little toughed up.
Of course.
Okay, whatever. Your kid needs to go through this. But at the end of the day, because at the pro career, I can assure you, if you go pro, you're going to be racing hurt all the time.
Yep, unfortunately.
But yeah, if you're not able to put your best effort out there, try it. Let up. Your kid's having a blast. He's like, Dad, I'm kind of hurt. But you know what? I'm having a lot of fun, and we're not really here to be a winner yet. We're not quite there yet. Hey, he wants to ride laps. Go let him ride laps. I don't have a
absolutely
experience. But if you're trying to grind them into the ground and they just are hurt, it's just not going to be good for them.
Well, that's where we go back to the facilities and the riding coaches, where it's this old no pain, no gain football mentality, where unfortunately it's the only sport that I've seen that it's at I won't say epidemic levels, but it's damn close. Like the perfect example is how many riding facilities and riding coaches are having their kids grind out 20-minute motos. I hate to say it, it's too late, man. You're not going to gain any fitness. That's why I always use the parallel. If we put it in mechanical terms, a bike with 100 hours on it is not going to build any confidence in an athlete, especially when you get mud on the radiator, bake the motor with a bunch, and then it grenades itself. Everybody would go, well, of course, in a mechanical sense.
Yeah, I should have known that was coming.
Right.
Yeah, we're gonna have to back this up another. We'll do another podcast where it starts off with, I think, the blocks, the building, the procedure, all that stuff. Yeah. But yeah, if it's unfortunate, we're kind of close now. But if you're grinding out 20s right now,
stop.
Probably need to stop.
You need to stop. Go the opposite direction.
Yeah, the other part of that I always say is like, my thing is, if you're healthy 1 week leading into Loretta's, I see families ride right until the day they leave.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, how much are you gaining in 3 days?
You're not. You're going backwards.
Right. And physiologically, right? But even if
you're going backwards,
pick up, like if you were getting 1% better, you're not gaining speed enough that will change your influence on Loretta's. But I see it all the time. I mean, that's why these alternate people go, is like, oh, wow, 3 days before Loretta's, he broke his wrist because they were riding.
Yep.
Well, it would have happened. And I get it. It could have happened at Loretta's.
Certainly. It could happen walking across the street.
Prepare your whole year, and you're going to throw away 1 week before Loretta's? That's dumb.
I say this to my clients every single day. Between now and Loretta's, like at the time of this recording, we're about 3 weeks out from Loretta's. The only way that you're going to improve speed is dial in your technique. It's not about grinding at 92% of maximum heart rate.
No.
It's not about seeing if you can go 27 minutes to make a 20-minute motos. That work should have been done literally over the last 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
The only way to be able to improve by a tenth, a quarter, a half is you working with a riding coach on, and fill in the blank, roll speed. No, not dragging the brakes as much, whatever it may be, whatever your bad habit is. Maybe you drag the clutch too much, or you double clutch, just one of those bad habits. Work with a riding coach who can say, hey, look, but here's where the conversation goes literally 360 degrees. A riding coach isn't going to help you as an athlete unless you're rested, fed, and hydrated.
Right.
I want, for anybody who's listening and taking notes, think about success in 4 pillars. You have preparation, fed, rested, hydrated, then focused. So now you show up to your riding coach, you've got all those boxes checked. When you work with a riding coach, your fitness is going to play a factor. Sprint speed, late race endurance, and lactate tolerance. That's pillar number 2. We refer to that as the fitness phase. The third phase is execution. It's a 20-minute moto. If you sprint at an intensity for 2 laps, it's not me saying that you're going to go backwards. It's a physiological fact. You will go anaerobic, and there's only one direction you can go.
We've talked about that on this year.
Yes.
It took me years to realize this, that, as an amateur, you ride 4 or 5 lap sprints.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you ride for the most part, till Loretta's or something like that. You're a sprint rider. If this was a road track race or ice skating, you were that type of athlete that was basic. And I would say motocross is a lot like a 400, maybe an 800 meter sprint as amateurs, maybe like an 800.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's kind of about what
4 to 6 minutes. Yeah.
Right. Like these short motos are analogous to that type of event where you're not full pace, but you're damn near full pace.
Yep.
And then when you're done, like you're cooked, you're out. The difference is now you cannot do that for 20s. And this is what a lot of athletes don't understand. Like you said, okay, I'm going to go 2 laps hard. I'm going to go anaerobic. Dude, you're going to have to recover, and you got to be damn good at that. Your physiological side is going to have to be crazy high on that. Like you have to have, train for this. Odds are you're going to have arm pump when you do that. You're going to be tired. And then for a lot of people, they're not going to be able to push back up to their normal heart rate number for the rest of that moto.
You're exactly right.
Get off a matchstick and it's done.
But here's where there's another dynamic of danger, if I may use that word appropriately. If you're running a 10K and you went out through the first, 3K and you realize, hopefully with a heart rate monitor, you know where that number's at. You know what it feels like. We do what's called the blind test. Turn your watch backwards, run, guesstimate what your number is, and then look at it so you start to get a feel.
And moto guys are bad at this, or I was.
Yeah.
My perceived effort was always lower than my real effort because I was a pusher in moto. Like you could go, I was the type that could go hit my max pretty easily for long periods of time, but my performance level would drop, as I'm above my threshold. So like,
but think about it though, if you're a runner and you go through the first 3K and you recognize you've gone anaerobic,
you got to go.
You just simply slow down your lower leg. Your speed in running comes from the knee down. You slow it down until you become aerobic. Think about it as an invisible line. That may take you 1K. Well, in moto, if you slow down, let's say that you're running it for conversation's sake, you're running a 2-minute lap time. If you slow down to a 2:05 or 2:06, what does that do? The suspension doesn't work.
Yep.
Your timing is off.
And then it might make the heart rate go back up.
Well, no, you're going to wad yourself up is what you're going to do. Right. I mean, David Pingree talks about it. He slowed down on the last lap and then wadded himself up. Because the motorcycle is designed, and you know this because of your business, the motorcycle is designed for a certain amount of speed, velocity, and input. And if you go anaerobic and then you pull back on that, you throw off the entire balance of the physics of the motorcycle. Now, next thing, a runner, you slow down. No harm, no foul. Yep. You slow down on a motorcycle and yard dart yourself, and that's the first day of the week, and now you're bruised and battered because now, again, you've got 4 pillars. You have preparation, fit, fed, and rested. You have fitness, speed, endurance, and lactate tolerance. You have execution, the inverse relationship between speed or intensity and duration. If you go out at a 2-lap sprint knowing you've got a 10-lap race, that's an execution error. That's not a fitness issue.
You need to have a game plan going into it.
But you got to know what you can do. Like, 100%. Can I race 20 minutes at 185, or do I need to pull that back to 172 to finish 20 minutes?
100%.
That's an execution issue, not a fitness issue.
Well, and most kids, unfortunately, you're a little higher in race day sometimes, right? So a lot of I see this all the time. You talked about arm pump. We talked about this another time, but a lot of parents are like, "Oh, my kid's getting arm pump only on race day, never get it on practice." Like, okay, so what's their heart rate on the 2 days?
Yep.
Are they higher? If they're higher, that's your problem. No. I'm like, yes,
yes, it is.
Like, you have to teach him how to not do that on race day, but then he can't go as fast. Well, then why aren't you practicing like that?
Amen. Yeah, so that's what I love about the heart rate monitor. What people don't realize is, and I'm going to use loose numbers again, if you can ride between 180 and 190, and let's say that you go to Millville, right? You know that you can race 180 to 190. Well, then you can take that number to Minneo's, Daytona, Loretta's, anywhere, as long as it's within 6 weeks. We always say that your heart rate number can change over a 60.
Well, and then I have read and I have experienced in Texas, the amount of heat and humidity changes this too. Your heart rate will be higher. And
100%.
So you have to understand that going to Loretta's. I could do these numbers at 60 degrees outside. Trust me, you can't do it when it's 95. It's not possible.
We do everything in temperature silos. We do them at 10-degree silos.
Right.
Your heart rate against lap time is predicated off of heat and humidity.
Yeah.
So what people don't realize is when your skin is sweating, it's water that meets humidity in the air, which is water against water. You now have we refer to in the physiology world as a water blanket. The dissipation of heat, the exothermic process, cannot do its job. It's no different than you covering your shrouds with mud.
Yep.
If you can't get fresh air on there, the internal motor heats. The human body is the exact same way. What makes us very, very difficult, what makes our sport so unique, can you imagine my professional triathletes at Ironman Hawaii? Helmet, gloves, goggles, jersey, pants, boots, right? Every square centimeter of their body being covered. Let's add a 600-degree motorcycle, and then let's add 100% humidity with, especially at Loretta's when you're in the valley, there's no wind blowing.
Yeah.
So you have heat, you have humidity. What did they say last year? The temperature of the track was 107 degrees.
Right.
That's the track. Then we got an evening of rain. So now you got a moisture packet that sits in the valley. You've got water coming off the creek, right? So that's coming in, adds more to the humidity. And then your son or daughter cracks under the pressure of heat. Now, I'm going to go down a bunny trail of physiology. If it's too sophisticated, please forgive me. I'll keep it short. What people don't realize is your heart rate is going to be elevated artificially if the body can't get rid of heat. So you've got to train for the specificity of that, because if I get, and I don't let my athletes do this, I have to educate them. If your race intensity is 180 to 190, that race intensity now becomes 170 to 180 because it's artificially elevated. And a lot of people are like, no, he's got to race 180 to 190. That's essentially racing 190 to 200.
Yeah.
Because the body is trying to wick away heat that it can't get rid of. So it backs into the system and the muscles. Just like a motor, you lose
because
power.
You're in Texas. When when I told you one year I was way into road biking, mountain biking, whatever. I mean, the difference in my output level between a 60 or 55-degree day versus a 100-degree day here in Texas is unreal.
Yep.
Like, it's huge. And the same applied to the dirt bike. When it's really hot here, I got to a point where I was 35-minute fit on a dirt bike, go hard the whole time, good, consistent. And, in the summer. But then, like, if I got the opportunity to ride when it was a nice, cool 70-degree day, I'm like, I cannot get tired today.
That's right.
Because it's a whole different ballgame. But if you're not used to that for Loretta's, it will kick your ass. And if you're wondering why your kid's a little bit less, a little bit below what you've seen if you're in a cooler climate, that's not a question of effort, or it's literally the heat. And there's so much physiological data on this. I mean, you're the expert on it, but there's just so much that's been published on this. It's a fact. There's no way around it.
Well, look at Chase. Remember Chase Sexton when he was riding for Geico 250 and at WW Ranch goes one DNF. Yeah, in fact, he went one DNS. He didn't even start the second moto because of heat stroke.
Yep.
And if I could think about this, you have parents that will spend tens of thousands of dollars to get to Loretta's and not take into consider heat and humidity. Like, for example, I asked my parents of my clients, I know we've got some very young athletes. We've got two kids that I think can win the 85 class this year. We've got one on a 65 that I think can win this year. And those are young ages, right? Yeah. These are young kids that want to be out on the golf cart. They want to be in the creek.
Right.
And I said, unfortunately, the bad news is you need to be in your motorhome all day, every day, out of the heat, out of the humidity. You've got 1 20-minute moto. Expose yourself. You got to, we could talk all day about how to acclimate the body to get ready for the heat of the race.
And here's another part of tips and tricks. You need to be at staging 1 hour before your moto. That is a requirement.
Yep.
So how are you going to do that?
So
your bike has to be there, a mechanic has to be there, your rider doesn't.
That's right. And remember,
these are things you have to think about. Bring things down to cool you off down there. Keep your rider cool while he waits on this gate. Don't let him cook in the sun and be hot. Not just shade. Bring some cool towels. Maybe bring extra gloves. Maybe bring other things, or don't have them. You can have them fully kitted out, but you have so much time down there. It's something you need to think about. I was gonna say, my tips and tricks, like you were saying, stay in the motorhome. Totally agree. Or enjoy that river. It is very cool. It's very cold. If you have an off day or it's after your motos, but try to stay out of the heat as much as you can during that week, because it will just beat your body into the ground 100%. But again, you can enjoy Loretta's, like you said, but try to do things that are keeping your temperatures down. So enjoy that river, be in that water. Post your moto, I'll be honest, in my opinion, that's a great cool off thing you can do post moto, is just go run right in there, hop in there and get your core temperatures down. I've seen people, a lot of the classes, like I forget what class it was, but like girls and super mini, and then there's some 125 classes. There's a couple of classes at Loretta's. It's the same moto schedule every year, by the way, that are almost back to back. Like you can have kids who are 3 or 4 motos apart.
Yeah.
If that's you and you know that, you need to have a plan for cool down. Do not go sit up there in that damn staging lane after that freaking moto with your kid cooking. Do not do that. So that's a huge thing too. What about, so hydration throughout the course of the week? What are some of the things that you have to think about? Bring things down to cool you off down there. Keep your rider cool while he waits on this gate. Don't let him cook in the sun and be hot. Not just shade. Bring some cool towels. Maybe bring extra gloves. Maybe bring other things, or don't have them. You can have them fully kitted out, but you have so much time down there. It's something you need to think about. I was gonna say, my tips and tricks, like you were saying, stay in the motorhome. Totally agree. Or enjoy that river. It is very cool. It's very cold. If you have an off day or it's after your motos, what are your tips and tricks on that side of things? So, okay, you're going to have to drink, you're going to be on top of it.
Well, this is the irony of what we were just talking about. If you're going to allow that, some people may be offended by that, but if you allow your son or daughter to be out in the heat and humidity, you got to realize that you're losing the battle.
Yep.
I don't care what you do for a living. If you're out in the sun for 8 or 9 hours, how tired are you? Even if you were just standing outside or sitting outside watching a football game, right?
Yep.
If you're in the direct sun and the heat, how exhausting is that? Now, this is the same week that we're trying to conserve energy for 5 days of racing. We kind of talked briefly about it here. It's interesting to me how parents will blame the motor builder, the suspension company, their fitness coach, their riding coach, their facilities. They'll blame everybody in the world when their son or daughter has gone out and made some really dumb choices. You're sitting in a golf cart, jerking around, driving around in the heat and humidity for 2, 3, 4 hours. You think it's benign. Well, what does heat exhaustion come? Where does heat exhaustion come from? Exposing the body to the heat, thermal regulation. It is extremely stressful on the body. Well, remove the stress, because where people have a tendency to screw the pooch a little bit is they want to go into the subject of hydration. Well, hydration needs to be very fundamental, right? Just keep it the same. You don't need to overhydrate.
No.
You don't need to overdrink. The only time you need to do that is if it was a qualifier and you're racing 8 motos. That's a totally different playground.
Yeah, Lorettas in general might be 2 motos max per day.
At best.
It's not. Every facility is doing way worse than that right now. Way more than that right now.
Oh, it's
right?
ridiculous.
So if you can't do that at Loretta's, you have a problem. But part of that problem, like you said, is your kid at these facilities are typically not literally lazy, but are they out in the heat and the sun playing around all day at the facility? Usually not. They usually go do their motos, and then they go do their gym work, and then they go inside and do whatever they're doing, right? So I agree. I mean, but yeah, you nailed it. You want to win at Loretta's? Sorry, this isn't playtime.
Well, and I know it's hard because, I've had parents that have said, yeah, but my little Johnny gets to see his friend from California and we're from Florida. I understand that. It would cost you less money to fly little Johnny's buddy from California to your house after Loretta's and let him hang out in your pool and go out on the boat,
Yeah.
It's one of the situations where, again, if this is an offensive comment, I'll own it, right? I say to my parents, if your athlete is going to drink Coca-Cola and he's going to eat fast food and he's going to screw around on his phone all night long and not take sleep seriously, I refer to that as local level effort. So let him race locally. Let him be a stud locally. That's perfectly, and you're not mad at him. But where I have a problem is when you have young athletes who they expect their parents to get them to the races with a race motor, with race suspension, with new Dunlops, new with everything. And then they go there with only giving local effort, wanting national equipment. They want a riding coach and a performance motor specialist and suspension coach and a riding coach. Well, wait a second. Mom and dad are giving you a national level platform. You're providing them a local level effort. Now, if that butt hurts the young athlete, blame Rob. I'm cool with that.
Well, and the frustrating part is the parent side. Parents continue to fund efforts like that all the time. Well, because the parent wants it, they want it more than the kid wants it. They really do.
In some cases, the parents have said, but if I can just kind of get them to push through this threshold, like if I can get them to that race and they can see,
right,
you were 12 and you put a local level
put a little more
into it and you got 12. What if you had slept 9 hours? What if you did foam rolling twice a day? We're not asking you to take on the world, just small attention to detail. Now your mom and dad has provided you someone like my services. They've provided a good local riding coach, maybe sign them up for a facility. Well, you did 10% of what we asked, or even 50%. What if you did 60%? Would that be a top 8? If you did 90%, I have this year, I hope that we'll go over 270 national championships, right? I didn't put that sweat equity in, the riders did. I only tried to direct the efforts of the athlete and try to encourage their parents to build a framework. I think a lot of parents forget the idea that when you look at whatever your favorite team is, Tomac, Webb over at Star, or whether you like Sexton over at KTM, or wherever your favorite Lawrence brothers at Honda, right? Think about what that environment is. It's an environment of success.
100%.
If Jet and Hunter want chicken cordon bleu for lunch in between motos or in between practice and their first moto, you can guarantee chicken cordon bleu is going to be in there. If Tomac wants his motorhome at 72 degrees and he wants Angus burgers on a salad, you can guarantee that that's what he's going to get. And to me, that's what the opportunity of Loretta's is. You're creating an environment of success to create success the same way a factory truck and its awning for that given day is there to freaking win. And if Shimoda, if Shimoda won't wear anything but white gloves,
right?
If
you
that
got to put that environment
you have
around that athlete that he can win at.
But that environment
that goes to don't build the environment around. So of all the things you can do wrong, do not build the environment around that no athlete could win at.
Absolutely.
And I see that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's literally half of this industry is a toxic, and it's not, I'm not like, I like pushers. I
absolutely
push, but do not build an environment where, hey, your kid could never win in this environment. It's just not there. So,
well, that's where it goes catch-22. Like I say to my clients all the time, when the race is over and you go through everything that didn't go well, sometimes it was Uncle Eddie who showed up, got drunk and got in a fight with somebody. That's an easy fix. It's the idea that you've got a mom and dad that have these unrealistic expectations, or they're comparing themselves to someone at their local track that they have this vendetta against. And now the parents' egos are hurt more than, the rider rode well, but the local kid beat us maybe just on technicalities or whatever. But now the parents are pissed off. And I think anybody who's listening to this has had those days where you drive home from the track and dad's mad at mom, mom's mad at dad, dad's mad at the rider's mad at dad. So everybody drives home in silence. And then you start asking yourself at the end of the week, that's why I publicly have said this and I've gotten wrath for it. But, when you look at Loretta's, right? Monday is stopwatch nationals. Tuesday, most people think either we're on track for a win or let's say top 10, or we just shit the bed and the week's over. So now the drinking level goes up quite a bit on Tuesday.
Yeah.
By the time you get to Wednesday, most people, it's very polar. It's this week sucks. We're packing up. We're selling everything. We're getting out of the sport. We shouldn't be here to begin with, or we're on cloud 9. And then it takes the huge shift on Thursday going into Friday when, wait a second, with that 3-5, ironically, the winner of the first moto DNF. So we're actually back in it on Thursday. And this is where I want to encourage the parents. Manage Tuesday as if it was Friday going into Saturday. Manage Wednesday. Because when you get to Friday and you realize, oh my goodness, we're actually in this with a 3-5. Well, if you've had this emotional roller coaster for 4 consecutive days,
right?
We've said it. We've seen somebody that was barely in the top 10 win the championship on Saturday.
And that's a lesson for regionals, really, which this podcast will touch on next year. You're never out of it. You'd be shocked.
Never.
I say never. I mean, a 20th you might be, but you literally, you're floating around 10th and you're like, oh man, you never know.
And if you go back and you look at the results when the week of racing is over, I love it because it'll show you what the motos were. I always have my athletes cover up the second and the third moto.
Right.
So you look at the guy that got, let's say the guy or the girl that got, let's say top 3, right? Well, the first moto, he got a 7th. She got a 5th. What's it like in the pit that night? Is everybody pissed off? This over? We screwed it. Wasted all year, right? We've all been there and heard it.
Yep.
Then also you get to the second moto and you went 7-2. Now all of a sudden, if you just cover the third moto, right? Because you already know what the overall is. Where's your headspace with a 7-3?
Yeah.
If we didn't fuck up on Monday, first moto, we would have been, right? Then all of a sudden you get to the end of the third moto, you get a second place. The first rider went 1-3-29, and all of a sudden you get the overall or top 3, whatever.
Right.
Stop. You don't know what tomorrow's going to hold, but I say this all the time, don't take the past, pull it into the future and fuck up the present.
Well, and that's a huge mistake that every athlete makes is
absolutely. But that's why any show is here.
Right.
We've been there and worked with athletes.
Right.
It's like,
I mean, it doesn't matter the sport. What did Jordan say something about? Like, you got to take these shots. He's missed. He has the numbers. Like, I've missed this many shots.
Yeah.
He's
like, look at Babe Ruth, right?
This is what it took to make this many shots.
Babe Ruth,
he knew
home runs.
Right.
But also had the highest strikeouts.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you got a bad first moto, should that carry over to your second? No. So
no, it's over.
Get over it. Go out there and do your best for your next moto.
Well, and even take that to the track. The best riders, and I love watching this. If you watch the rider that comes into the left-hander and just kind of dabs his foot, kind of tiptoes through it, that straightaway in front of the mechanics and over that little roller to the right, the champion will make up what he just lost in that left-hander. He will make it up in that next straightaway and that next right-hand turn instantly. Yep. And that's what I love. And I'm working with AC. This is one of my favorite parts about AC. He had an incredible knack for, I just lost 1/10 of a second. He would purposely focus on where do I pick that up before the next corner. Sometimes
try to make it up instantly. And on top of that, they have short memories, right? It's like, don't let a quick close encounter, a little swap, one mistake. Don't let that ruin your race.
Yeah.
Okay, you made a mistake. Keep going. Let's move on. You know what I mean? It's not a big deal. And that's true, right? Like I say in motocross, you have to. If you want to be an elite level guy, you got to have a short memory because you're going to have offs, you're going to have tips, you're going to have crashes, you're going to have bad days.
Well, look at Jet Lawrence.
Yeah.
I mean, he put the bike down, Roxon went around him. He ran Roxon down and passed him. I mean, and that's two of the best our sport has ever seen.
Yeah.
So these concepts are not just something that we're nebulously speaking about.
No.
You can go to your TV, you can go to YouTube now, and you can watch exactly what we're speaking about. That's why I love this show. And Derek, I want to thank you for putting the time with it, because if we can give people the Cliff Note version, like, oh yeah, I remember when Zach Friedberg didn't get in the top 3, but 1 out of 3 motos and got the overall, ironically, in the pro sport class of all classes.
Yep.
No class is immune to it. And I think people see that and they go, oh, that was in the 125 class, or that was.
Well, with me personally, Caden had his pro sport title, his 250 pro title or whatever it was. He won a couple years ago.
Yeah.
He had a pretty damn good start, first moto, and crashed going into Storyland, essentially.
Okay.
I'm trying to think if it was, anyways, before the triple, after the triple, whatever. I don't remember, but it was first lap. So he goes up there. Okay, boom, we're in contention. This is great. First moto of the week, right? Yep. To on the ground, dead last. And I'm like, happy? And then I'm like, where the hell did it happen? Did the bike
sadness or euphoria?
I see him literally 20 seconds behind 40th. And I'm like, oh man, our week's over. Like that's how my head felt.
Sure.
There was Ryder D, Chance Hymas, you know what I mean? Like Gavin Tyler, all in the class. You ain't giving, you ain't spotting them any positions. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember, somebody have to go look it up, but by the end of that moto, I think he got 7th.
Wow. That's incredible.
He ended up winning that title because of that ride. Mm-hmm. People remember, I think he won like a moto pretty convincingly, after that or whatever. That's the ride they remember. The reality was he was putting down the fastest lap times of that race, and he wasn't getting talked about. They weren't mentioning him. He wasn't the guy on the thing, but he was at the end of that last 5 laps of that moto, he was the fastest dude on the track, and that earned him a 6th or a 7th or whatever it was, maybe a 5th. I mean, it was an unbelievable ride.
Sure.
And that's when you win your title. So even if you have a mistake, you have a problem, do not give up on it. Give it your best effort, because if you're fit, if you're healthy, if you're ready to go, you will pick people off. You will catch those people who are not those things, right? And they're also just that mental toughness. There's people giving up on motos. They're not tired. Their body's not out of shape. They just gave up on it. They're like, I'm not getting the results I want. I'm not going to fight for this spot. I'm over it. You know what I mean?
I can't remember. You may remember because you're more of a aficionado of this, but I want to say it was in the super mini class. And again, I don't remember how far back it was. And the leader was so far in front that the second place guy couldn't see him. Like it was literally, that far out in front. Well, the guy grenaded, the motor grenaded. The second place guy didn't know it. And you could tell he was riding defeated. Yeah. The third place guy ran him down and won the moto. And so thinking that he got, third, he actually ended up getting second. But had he won that moto, he would have won the overall for the week.
I'm trying to think of the year. I know I do recall it. I think I was there. And I remember a year where, just you never know what's going to happen. I think
you never know what's going to happen.
It was the year Suzuki was like the program in that class. I think it was Treadles, Red Bull guys. I don't remember. And last lap, the leader hits a lapper and goes down right at, I don't know what that section's called, but it's right before the finish. It's all the 3 jumps before the finish.
Yep.
And I'm watching it. I'm like, oh, that's the leader. Like this race was a sewed up, over and done with race, right? Another kid wasn't that far behind. But that kid had been grinding the whole moto, if I remember right. Like he was grinding and grinding. And sure enough, comes around because he's been grinding, because he didn't give up on that last lap. That other kid picks up. This other kid goes by him right at the same time and gets the title. And I'm like, you never know what's going to happen. And you see it in pro. A guy gives up on a moto and all of a sudden a guy in front of him tips over. And it's like, if you had just not gave up on that, you would have won.
That's right. So. Well, and I hope I'm okay, because you and I didn't speak about it before today's conversation, but you and I are going to Loretta's with our scouting hats on. We've got some big things that we want to launch in 25. And you and I have talked about it. I want that guy that's grinding out of sight, realizing he's 15 seconds behind, but he didn't care. He's racing like the last lap is the first lap. He's charging to the finish line. For people like myself, and we've got some team support from like Precision Transport, and we've got yourself and HBI Development, or HBI Auto, excuse me. And, these guys, they want heart. They want integrity. They want that dog in the fight. It's not always about, did you win the overall? It was, what was the character on the track? Like we were saying, I want the rider that's got, the duct tape boots, that just is appreciative of racing their dirt bike. And for the parents that have raised good kids that are like, hey, number one, and I'm going to call him out here, Chase Dashel. Like I've put all my eggs with Chase for the last couple of years. And, Chase has been raised by a set of parents where he's extremely humble. He's a hard worker. He works with Ryan Sipes out at Sandbox. It's just a great dynamic. My point is, Chase hasn't won everything he's entered, but that's not what caught my attention in the first place.
Right.
It was his beaming smile. It was his 7th place, taking his helmet off and giving his dad a high five. Like, yes, of course Chase wants to be top 3, win everything. They all do. The champions all do.
Positive attitude goes a long way. Yeah, it really it's infectious, right? So
it is.
Being around people that are positive is an infectious thing in life. And it's they're what is that, magnanimous? Is that the term where it's like, hey, you want to be around magnanimous people that charismatic leaders, and even as a young kid or as a young athlete, you're leading this crew around you to success. Your parents might be driving it, but in order to get there, you are a part of that too. So you have to understand.
Well, and that's why I think the parents need to realize you can make or break your son or daughter's future. I'm not going to name any names, but I can give you a laundry list of riders that were really, really good. And speaking to the powers to be, they're like, yeah, but the parents are a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
It's just not worth it.
Them, this is the very sad part about the business of our industry, which is a business, is there's another kid lining up ready to take it. So you might be slightly better than that other kid today. Maybe, right? Let's say you are. But if you're not worth working with, if that family's not worth working with, that team will go right behind you to the next kid that they like, because if that kid doesn't pan out, there's another one behind him. You know what I mean?
Well, and here's a very dangerous situation for the parents. And I hope maybe just one, Derek, out of our numbers are growing substantially. So I'm thankful for it. If I can get one parent to have an epiphany right here, the show will be worth it. If you bounce from facility to facility to facility and you talk shit on the facility that you left, that the reason why your son or daughter is not winning is because that facility didn't give you what you thought you needed, you're the problem. If you bounce from motor builder to suspension company to motor builder to suspension company, you're the problem. I had an athlete who I worked with, and the parents called up and they're like, we hear you're the best. And I'm like, I appreciate that, but I can only do my best. I have to earn your trust. Well, the bottom line was, and for the sake of time, I'll cut it very, very short. The kid didn't want to do the work.
Yeah.
So of course the parent said my program was not good enough for his son or daughter. And I'm going to be a little bit of an asshole here, but I said, until you can say the program doesn't work, you actually have to do the program.
Right.
That's the problem. That's the paradigm shift. I've got heart rate data. I've got files. I can see how much your son or daughter is or isn't actually doing. So before you say my program didn't work, why don't you ask yourself, how much of the program did your son or daughter actually do? Because then I'll have an adult conversation with you. I have very thick skin. Every 6 weeks, we change our program up and we adjust it based on your ability to absorb. Well, how am I supposed to adjust a program now I have a year's worth of schedules that are pretty much regimented. And I've had people say, well, I'm doing the same program that the other guy is. Well, for the first 6 to 8 weeks, it's almost identical for everybody, because you've got to get baselines. You have to put together a parameter of how much volume of training at what intensity can the athlete actually absorb.
It's like college, right?
You start exactly.
Hey, you gotta go to do the basics before I can specialize you.
But the parents can't keep blaming the motor builder. No, you can't blame the riding coach. You can't blame the nutritionist. You can't. Yeah, what's going on here?
I can't tell you how many. I put our best effort forth every single time. Right? Like, I'm not going to sell you junk, and I don't have an incentive to. I had this one huge headache with this. I'm not going to say their names because I could, it's not the purpose of it. But they sent in some cylinders, 285s, and one was both were Yamahas. One was a Super Mini, one wasn't. It was like an Athena kit or something like a aftermarket cylinder kit. Mm-hmm. One of them was in great functional shape. We ported it, sent it out the door. Here you go. The other one, the power valves were stuck halfway in the cylinder. And the guy's like, no, they weren't. I said, they were free. I'm like, dude, why would I stick your power valves in your cylinder? I'm not trying to make this up. This is extra work for me. I can't get these things out. We literally had to destroy parts to get them out. They were so wedged in there. I tried soaking them, and I tried everything I could possibly do.
Sure.
We had to beat them out with a big hammer, and they finally came out. That doesn't happen by accident. You could tell me that it didn't, but what is my incentive on that? So, like you said, no, you're the problem here. I'm just a shop trying to ask, and I told the guy, I'm like, look, dude, for this little port job, right? This is a couple $100. It doesn't it's not I don't need that couple $100 for the headache that this
Not
is.
the headache.
At the end
Exactly.
of the day, I want you to be successful. That's what I told the guy. I said, I did everything I could do from this. We got it done. We got it fixed. I had to repair a power valve. I put 5 times the time into that it would normally have taken had it been correct.
Yep.
And it's like, at the end of the day, I still want you to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same with any shop in this country for the most part. There are some guys who are just going to take your money and it is what it is, right? But for the most part, these shops, if they want to be around for 5 or 10 years, they're doing their best to provide you what you need. It may or may not be the best product in the country, but I can guarantee you that it's not so far off that your kid can't win.
Well, you and I talked about this a couple of shows ago, and I'm going to bring it back up because it's relevant to what you just said. When I have a rider, because I'm fortunate, right? We have the wearable devices. I can look at average and max heart rate. We do a race day simulation, and then we take that race day simulation and we bounce it against collected race data. You go to a qualifier, you go to Mammoth, you go to Mini-O's, you go to Daytona, Freestone. Eventually, you get enough of a profile built where you say, okay, based on your testing data and based on your race data, I'm not going to say we can predict it, but we can predict it. I know that you can go to Loretta's and do a 20-minute moto, and you should race between X and Y. Let's say a heart rate range of 182 to 195.
Right.
How do I know that? Because of all the historical collected data. Given the heat, the humidity, and the duration, you reverse engineer it. This is what I know you're capable of. Well, when you, as a parent, call me up and you say, you need to work with my son's arm pump. This is the comment you need to fix my son's arm pump. Excuse me? Yeah, well, my son got arm pump this weekend. We think it's a fitness issue. Okay, I'll take that, but let's have an adult conversation. Let's get a cup of coffee and let's have an adult conversation. I've got 4 months of data. You've never had any issues with arm pump whatsoever. You work with Derek Harris. We know that your motors, you rotate them on a regular basis per Derek's request. We know that margin of difference between your race bike and your practice bike is less than 2% because you do a great job. Awesome. You've done exactly what we need you to do. Because the bigger the disparity between a practice bike and the race bike, the propensity for arm pump is going to go up. Why? Because your belly button falls behind the pegs. You're hanging on for dear life. Welcome to the world of arm pump. You didn't get arm pump in the first moto and we won. You thought I hung the moon. Your son shits the bed and gets 7th in the second moto, and immediately you're calling me, telling me I need to fix his arm pump. I really want the parents to stop and think about it. I have thick skin. I've been doing this for almost 40 years. I don't give a shit what you have to say, as long as you're willing to have an adult conversation with the collected data. But when you start bouncing, he's not in shape. Shop,
trainer to trainer, blame
That's
the
my
blame.
point.
And I'll give you a great example of that is the following, which is I know some athletes who fight arm pump their whole life. And there have been athletes like that. And I don't know.
But it's their whole life.
It's their whole life, right? So it is what it is. This is something you have fought. You have not figured it out. And I know guys, I'll give you an example. Caden is one of those guys. He pretty much doesn't get arm pump.
Mm-hmm.
It's never been a problem of his. Now, I also know for a fact, and he probably doesn't want me to share it, but if he's having a shitty day and things aren't going well, he won't push himself.
Right.
His heart rate will be low the whole moto. He's not going to even get close to arm pump because he's not near his capability.
Threshold.
Right?
Yep.
But then there's guys who, so I'm getting at it, but if you've had it your whole life, and this is something, I say your whole life, a lot of times it doesn't happen until they become puberty. I think that's a crossover for some reason that arm pump becomes more prevalent because a lot of parents go through that. He never used to get it. I'm like, yeah, he went through puberty. He's a different human being.
Right.
But it's like you've been on 7 different training programs. You tried this guy, you tried that, and let's say you work hard. You put in the work, you put in the hours, you put in the time. Sorry. If you're consistent with your workouts and you're getting more fit and you're doing half-assed right things, you don't even have to have the perfect program. If you're consistently still getting arm pump, it's not something that we can attribute to training, right? I can't fix it in the sense that you think I can. All I can do is make your heart rate capabilities really good. All we can do is make you hydrated right and make you rested and all of the things. We can do that and we can show through data. But if you're not getting it on practice day and it's only on race day, guess what? It's something to do with your athlete. And you need to solve that, right? And that's, we talked about this.
But the hard part about it, though, Derek, is there's no way to quantify if the athlete's actually got arm pump other than the fact that it's a very generic catch-all. My rider rode like crap, so it's got to be something else.
Well, they might say they come in and they go, hey, my arms are pumped up.
I'm okay with that.
But I'm saying, like, for me to get over it personally, and again, it's anecdotal. It's not the same for everybody. But for me, it was really learning that, okay, I'm the most fit I've ever been, but I can still get it. Well, why? What is the causalities of it, right?
There's the big question.
Is it form? Is it, like you said? And for me, it was a propensity. It's mostly How hard do you push yourself?
Mhm.
Where's your heart rate numbers at? Like you said, oh, all right, I go out and sprint full anaerobic lap 1. I'm going to pay the price for the next 3 fucking laps on this track.
That's exactly right.
I'm going to pay the price for the whole rest of the race. A lot of people don't think like this.
And take it into consideration if you have a track that's rough like Loretta's.
Yeah.
Right. So now you've put a bigger burden from your belly button down to hold on to the bike. And your rider's doing a good job doing everything that their riding coach taught them, toes in, pinching the bike, until their legs get so tired of a track that's rougher than something they've ever ridden before. Of course, they're going to sit down. Of course, the muscles between your knees and your groin are called the adductors, right? Those bad boys are going to get tired because they're riding a track that's rougher than and longer than they've ever ridden before.
And you'll never replicate it.
And this is where I go back to, if it's your first rodeo, that should be an epiphany. For the second, you should be prepared.
Yep.
And there's a big difference there. I do want to address a comment that you made, and I'm hoping that this will be another aha moment for your any listeners who your son or daughter has just hit puberty. When puberty drops in, we all know that's the big, testosterone is the main one that drops in, particularly for men. And so you think about it. If you think about sausage and the sausage casings, right? If you overstuff that casing, eventually you end up splitting the sausage casings. And you got to remember that testosterone increases the volume of blood that's going in. So this is one of the very common problems that we run into when somebody transitions into puberty is arm pump will be a complaint. It's no different than an elder, like some of my age, 55, 56 years old, that's taken testosterone. I can almost guarantee that arm pump's coming because I can't expand the width of my forearm,
right?
But the amount of testosterone and red blood cells that are in my bloodstream are going to increase the volume. It's like taking a water hose and hooking it up to a fire hydrant. It's just too much. So just keep that in mind. But be patient. Eventually, it'll all start to kind of balance itself out.
Your athlete might have to adjust what they're used to doing, right? And that's the thing.
Absolutely.
For me, it was just a threshold thing. It's like, okay, wow, I get arm pump every time I push past my threshold. It's a lactic acid problem. It's no different than if I push my legs to a sprint capacity in a bicycle and they get tired. That was my basic foundation of arm pump, and then it gets worse from there because you're trying to hang on and you can't hang on to the bike and all these things. Yeah, but if you know that, whatever it is for you, and each athlete's different, then you learn how to mitigate it and say, okay, I know that. So I know that on lap 1, when my adrenaline's really high and I got a good start, I have to mentally be like, yo, just mentally think you're riding 80%.
Right.
Even though you're not. So that you get through this first lap in your adrenaline rush and you keep your heart rate managed. And then when you kind of settle into that workload, you kind of, you can do it. But a lot of kids, I think they just get that. They stop breathing. They do all the things that everybody does on lap 1, right? I wear contacts. Obviously I wear glasses and I wear contacts when I want to do anything active. The very first time I wore them on a dirt bike, I had it fall out. And I'm like, oh, why are they falling out? And then I realized I'm not blinking for 3 laps at a time.
Yep.
You're just like this the whole time. You don't realize how wired your body is in these scenarios. So I had to teach myself to blink and, keep my eyes moist. Sure. That's a real pain in the ass. But that same thing is like, okay, am I breathing on lap 1? Okay, right through the first turn, am I taking is like you said with that blood sugar, glucose, can your body process? Am I mentally processing in a chill mode, or am I mentally processing fight or flight? Right. So,
and that's why we do race day simulation. Is we're actually evaluating average and max heart rate against air temperature, humidity. And then we weigh them before and after to figure out perspiration rate to make sure that we have stabilized.
How much water will somebody lose in a 20-minute moto? I've never weighed, so I don't know.
Yeah, we've had people lose up to, depending on body weight, we do it on percentages.
Okay.
We've seen people lose up to 3.5%, 4% in a 20-minute moto.
Let me do the math. So about, on me, that'd be 5 pounds.
Yeah, and unfortunately, once you go above 2%, you actually start to lose the strength and the endurance of the muscle.
Huge amount, right?
Yeah, so what happens is now you have a dehydration issue that's weakening the muscle, which then you lose power and muscular endurance, and then the rider thinks that they're not in shape. It has nothing to do with about being
just dehydrated, essentially.
Right. Well, and I've said this before on the show, and I'll reiterate it here. I've had people that will call me up and say, I need to really get in shape, and then we do some baseline assessments, and I'm able to illustrate to them, it's really not a fitness issue. You're chronically dehydrated, you're undernourished, and you don't sleep enough. And they go, wow, so you don't want us on your program? I said, no. If you feel that you want to elevate your game, you got to build that foundation to catapult off of. My responsibility is for you to understand, how do I build the foundation? It's food, water, and rest.
Right.
How much? That's individual. Right. Then we layer in testing to figure out opportunities for improvement. Then we take testing data from the racetrack. Right. We merge those together and build a program. Now we bring ourselves up to Loretta's. You'll see me say it on all my social media. It's just time to execute the plan.
Right. And that's a great point. You have to have a plan going into it. If you don't know what your plan is going into Loretta's, what are you going for?
Now, that goes back to what you said earlier. You got to have your year laid out for, all right, if Loretta's is our AAA priority, we go backwards from there,
100%.
From August to, let's say, when we always say, we use a calendar for illustration purposes, but essentially Mini-O's ends up being what we refer to as the preseason. And it really offends a lot of people because we don't taper for Mini-O's. Our athletes will do Loretta's. They get the 3 weeks of August. They get the first week of September off. Then we go into a 16-week preseason phase where we're really getting physically strong and building a monster.
You know, it's funny. You said something I just realized that I have. So if you could tailor a program perfectly, right? Your base season, you know, in rough, we'll let you go here soon. Like in base season is going to be like you said, kind of now or September or whatever, you need to start your base program, your base training, your long duration stuff, all that stuff. And then you'll do your program, like you're talking about. The funny part is like everybody does it backwards. Like we just basically said in this podcast is now you're doing all your long motos pre-Loretta's right before. But it's funny. I have an athlete who didn't make Loretta's this year, should have, didn't make it happen. And he's still training at a facility as part of the program that they're doing. And I'm like, it's funny because now you're getting to actually do what you do need to be doing this time of year for next year.
Yep.
But they're doing it for the wrong reasons. Like you're actually doing the right time to be doing this. And that's just funny, like how backwards that is. So,
well, I've been on public record and got ostracized when I made the comment, you can't go short and fast until you can go long and slow.
Right.
And people don't understand that. And I always use the analogy, if I was going to offer you $100 to hit 60 miles an hour and I give you a 65 or a 450, everybody would choose the 450. And I ask the same question, why? Well, it has more power. Okay, well then show me when you built your strength in the off season. Oh, I didn't. Okay, so you want power. So if I take an oversized carburetor, go with me. Let's say I'm going to show my age. Let's go grab a KX500, right? Get a KX500 carburetor and stuff it onto a KX65. That extra air fuel mixture isn't going to create more power. And that's what, unfortunately, a lot of the riding coaches and facilities try to advocate. The only way to build speed is go fast. No. If I want to build speed, I build a foundation of power and then I back it up with an aerobic capacity. If I have a 500cc cylinder, if I take a 65 carburetor, it isn't going to give it enough air fuel for the power to be generated.
Right.
So if you put those two together, right, a 65 carburetor isn't going to fuel a 500, and a 500 carburetor isn't going to make the 65 produce power.
Right. And that's where the whole program has to be tailored.
Well, that's where our athletes have taken and whipped everyone's ass, because the idea is you build a base of aerobic capacity complemented with maximum strength. You put that into pre-competitive.
Right.
So we go from building a base, then we go into pre-competitive. You drip a little bit of speed. Then you go into competitive phase one. Go with me here. It's easier to go faster because you've built a base of strength and aerobic capacity. Then you start to elevate your speed off of that over the next 4 to 6 months, peaking at Loretta's.
Look, a great example, like you said, about building a base. Let's say not even fitness. Let's say you're fit, but let's talk about riding. Jet and Hunter make it look easy.
Mm-hmm.
Chase makes it look pretty damn easy.
Mm-hmm.
That's not by mistake.
No.
They've built a foundation of technique that looks like that.
Yes.
Their worst mistake falls back to, like, their bad habits fall to a pretty darn good floor.
Yes.
That's where, like you said, they look slow when they go fast. And that's something that you as an athlete should strive to from a technique standpoint. But the same applies to your body program. Like you said, build it
100%.
Build a strong foundation to then build on what you want on top of, and that'll make you successful. I know you're probably getting late on the podcast.
No, you're fine. Real quick. Something that people need to take into consideration is, do you notice, and this is a difficult one, but for any of the parents that are listening to this that are going to go to Loretta's, you guys have the best future ahead of you. Because you got to remember, when this extended series, when they integrated the Supercross with the motocross, and then they have the 3 extra rounds at the end, if you have a son or daughter that's already racing professional, they essentially were told 3 months, 2 months maybe before the beginning of the season that said, hey, look, you're going to race from January to October.
Right.
If you have an athlete 12, 13, 15 years old, and they're going to go pro in 2 years, and let's say that the World Supercross goes south, and then you have the super, what's it called? What's the one we have? SMX, thank you. So if you take the SMX here, and you know that when your son's going to go pro in 2 years, you have 2 years to build the athletic durability, knowing that you have to race from January to October. you're going to be far better off being consistent than winning the first couple of races and then being out of the series altogether.
Not relevant to this year, and I could be very well wrong. I don't know. But last year, Deegan was so strong at the end of the year. It was mind-blowing to me. Absolutely mind-blowing to me. And that said, it was his rookie year, wasn't on a pro grind the year before.
Yep.
Right? So he had that going for him potentially. This year, he's been unbelievable early outdoors. I mean, just mind-blowingly good. He's mind-blowingly fit. He's strong. He's fast. He's all of these things. But I think the last 2 rounds, the quote-unquote chinks in the armor have been just little mistakes and little odds and ends. The lapper, that's not his fault. Like, that's, let's hate it. But that is, like Jason Anderson said when he crashed in qualifying, and he said, I think that we should be fining the AMA for mistakes like this because he gets fined so much. But that's an example of like, hey, that wasn't his fault. They screwed up. He crashed because of a thing. But that said, he wasn't lights out the best guy, in my opinion, this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
He's been really good. I mean, he clearly was one of the guys this weekend. There's no doubt. But maybe this year he's feeling a little bit of that pro grind fatigue. He was so strong last year. He did SMX, and then he probably had a really rough grind into this year, and then he gets hurt, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would bet that he's, and they're not dumb. If he really is, oh man, I'm a little bit tired, or things are not 100%, or let's say the rest of the season he's not quite as dominant as he was early. I mean, this is his title to lose. He should definitely win this title.
Absolutely.
But if he like it maybe isn't the Deegan we saw early in the year, that's a part of that role. This is a long ass season, so that's interesting to see.
Take it one more step, and I honestly haven't thought about it till you just brought it up, and you said that my thought stirred your thought. So this is pretty interesting. Have you noticed they started flying private? He had done it a couple of times, but now he's flying private every weekend. And if you think about where can they find? We say this with all of our coaches, right? We look at our coaches as we as a company, Complete Racing Solutions, our coaching certification is really an entrepreneurship program. It's about me wanting to grow other coaches' businesses faster than they could do it on their own, not arrogantly, but just on economies of scale. So what I always say with my entrepreneurs and my coaches is, how do you buy back your time? Stop wasting time doing things that really don't justify. You don't get enough of a return. And I think now that you just said that might be an extra, instead of, how it is, if you're going to fly commercial, right? You got to be at the airport 3.5, 4 hours early. If you've got an hour drive to the airport
and all that.
With Hippie and in Tallahassee, because I know this working with Dunge, you always have to fly from Tallahassee to Atlanta. That's the only connecting hub out of Tallahassee. So now you're adding another flight, higher risk of getting an illness, more time delays. So what could be literally a flight from Florida to, say, Texas, right? That could end up being a 5-hour day if you have a drive to the airport, a small commute to Atlanta, an hour to 2 layover, and then a 90-minute flight. There's 5 hours. Now, all of a sudden, and you bring up a really good point, you've got Deegan flying private where he can sleep in a little bit later. He can do a little bit more at home. He doesn't have to try to get to the airport 3 to 4 hours early.
Waste a whole day in travel, essentially.
And this is what Tomac has done great. He goes from Cortez, private airplane, motorhome, rig, track.
Yep.
Rig, motorhome, second moto, rig, track, back to the rig to the motorhome to the airport, home.
Yeah.
Think about everybody else having to fly commercial. You got to drag yourself to a rental car.
Right? And then Deegan was a little sick, he said last week. These are all the signs of like, hey, he might be a little bit run down. Everybody gets sick, right?
And now they're investing in things that can kind of offset that.
Right.
Yeah, he might spend $10,000 flying private, but he's going to win $50,000 from Stars, probably got somebody from Monster.
Exactly. So he's like, all right, he's betting on himself.
The ROI is there.
Buying his time back, right?
And that's exactly it. You nailed it. Buying his time back.
So that's an interesting perspective. And I think, the unfortunate side is, but this is called life. Mm-hmm. If he's winning, he can do this.
That's right.
If you're competing against him and you're like, oh, I wish I had that money, well, you got to win.
So but think about this, though. You bring up a good point, though, Derek. And I don't know, I've never met Brian Deegan formally, right?
Yeah.
But I would be very interested if Brian Deegan and his wife sat down with a piece of paper and said, how much money did they spend on a supercross track and all the things that they invested in? Right. Yeah, we get to see the byproduct of it now, but I think it goes without saying. I mean, how many pros have we heard on Gypsy Tales talk about the first money that they made, they invested it in property so that they could buy a track to ride just to speed up the whole process. Now, yeah, it takes money to make money, But then there's people that made a lot of money that squandered it, that didn't reinvest it. You know, there's people that say Deegan is like, oh, well, he grew up, you know, with a silver spoon. No, I disagree. I think the perspective needs to be that Brian Deegan, first of all, created something that didn't exist, freestyle motocross, created a brand in that, Metal Militia, took all that money. He was an early investor in Star that a lot of people are not aware of. The fact that he invested in, he bought Good Motorhomes, and you say, well, Good Motorhome, well, yeah, because he's on the road a lot, hitting all the amateur nationals. When they bought a house and built a track in it. So it was an investment that he turns and sells that, makes a little bit of money, reinvests it. Now to the point, you know, we're here and
kicking ass and like, well, this private thing makes sense.
Well, maybe Deegan starts his own 450 team. Would that not be the ultimate pinnacle of invest, reinvest, reinvest?
Re-kickstart the Militia brand or his own brand. Yeah, that'd be interesting too. Yeah, that's an excellent point, especially with how the industry's going. There's all sorts of rumors right now that some factory efforts will be gone. So,
or scaled back significantly.
Yeah, will no longer be a factory effort. Or you know what I mean? So that's certainly interesting.
Or some teams downsizing from, you know, 3 450 riders down to 1, and instead of 7 250 riders down to 2.
Weird business. 100%.
So good stuff, brother. I want to thank all the subscribers. The number count keeps going up. Thank you for spreading the word. Derek, thanks for your insight. I loved what you said a couple shows ago. There's a lot of smart guys out there like you, but you're not saying everybody needs to contact you, but you need to get educated. And, you know, we will be at Loretta's, depending on when you listen to this. So Derek and I will be powwowing around there. Like I said, we are going on a big scouting excursion there. But if you see us, please stop by, say hi, let us know if there's anything that we can be doing for you. In the meantime, Derek, we will catch up with you in a couple of weeks. Be safe.
All right, man. Have a good one.
Peace.